You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This episode we are jumping into the wide world of neurodivergence. In my experience as a goth through essentially my entire life, the personalities and the types of people you run into in goth spaces have always skewed heavily toward what might be considered odd, atypical, discomforting, or even difficult in some ways. So today we are going to explore how it feels to exist in a world that is built for someone other than you, and what ways that neurodiversity has become embedded in the fabric of the goth scene, the goth community, and goth culture. We'll also be discussing depression. We'll be looking at the impact of consumerism on goth influencers, always a hot topic. We'll hear about the lived experience of Black Goths. I have a short review of a new book called Goth Parenting, The Dark Joys of Raising Baby Bats. And I'll also be sharing an interview with my 11-year-old about his experience with goth parents and being odd in the world. I'm very excited about today's episode, so let's just jump right in. As always, I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I am here with my co-host, Trey. Our other guests are a delightful bunch of artists and musicians, so if you don't mind, let's just start with introductions. Anastasia, we can start with you. Can you share when and how you first discovered goth?
My introduction to goth actually started with me getting into nu metal first. That had a very slow transition over into goth eventually when I discovered it for the first time, when goth people told me that I was not goth for listening to Slipknot and Korn. And it was definitely an interesting experience being, I guess, corrected for the first time. And instead of having a defensive, but goth is a mindset personality, I decided to take it upon myself to actually listen to what they had to say. And in the process, discovered a whole rich subculture of music, which has ultimately led me to now being a promoter, which is pretty fun.
Can you also share your socials for us, both your personal ats and for your band and any other projects?
Sure. So I am Anastasia of the Dark on Instagram, TikTok. I run a event called Slings and Arrows. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and I'm also in a death rock band called Cemetery Sex.
Love it.
Cemetery.sex on Instagram.
One of the best band names.
For sure.
Tay, what about you? What was your pathway into goth?
Ooh, okay. So I started off in the emo scene because my sibling, that was the music they would listen to. And of course, like, I was like, ooh, what's that? And it started off as like, that neon pop punk stuff, like All Time Low and all those like
Oh, yeah.
cringy early 2000s bands.
Yeah.
And then I started getting into the more of the heavier stuff, like metalcore and post-hardcore and all those other genres. And then when I was 18, I found It's Black Friday on YouTube. And once I saw like the way she looked and everything, I was like, what is this? Like, I had never ever seen somebody like that before. And I just ended up checking out the music, the aesthetic and everything. And I absolutely fell in love with the music, and I haven't looked back.
What are your socials and shirt hole and all that?
Oh, okay. So My socials are baddie.nerd for my old account on Instagram, and my account I'm active on now is gothic.enjoyer. And I'm also in Sanguine Symphony as the one of the main instrumentalists and bedroom producers at Sanguine Symphony Music on Instagram. And I'm in a band called Shirthole. We're a garage punk riot girl band in New Jersey, and we're at Shirthole Band on Instagram.
Also a very good band name.
Yeah, she basically it was Shithole, but our singer is the sweetest being you ever meet in your life, and she was
Aw.
like, "That's too vulgar," so it became Shirthole.
Adorable. I love
Yeah,
that.
so we're recording our debut studio album in a few days.
You love to see it.
Yes.
Well, Alice, what about you?
Oh boy. It's kind of a sad story.
We're on the right podcast.
My dad died, so I was looking for
Ah.
like some, dark, sad tunes. I found Sisters of Mercy, and it was just love at first sound. Like I found Bajas, Susan and Banshees, and like it's just it really like helped me like through a very dark time. So yeah, it helped like shaped who I am now.
No, I do think a lot of, we talked about this last episode, I believe. Time has no meaning, but just the fact that goth culturally and musically has a lot of ability to speak to the suffering and the nuances of life that I think is very beautiful. Yeah.
She led me to making music as well. Given my dad and uncle passed, and like I have a box of his poetry and shit. So Memoirs of Dead Men was born. Yeah, the band name.
I love that.
Memoirs of Dead Men on Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, everything else, Amazon Music. Gothadelic Cult is my Instagram handle. There's a spell with K's, not C's. I'm also in a band called Sanguine Symphony with Tay as well.
Fantastic. I usually ask this when we're not recording, and I did forget, but we may as well go around real quick. Can I get everybody's pronouns?
Any pronouns?
I am they, them pronouns.
I go by it.
That works. Same any as Anastasia, though if you misgender me, I'm usually overly happy, especially if you can misgender me multiple times in a row.
And they, them for me. So excellent. There was something that's been bothering me a little bit that I wanted to get off my chest and see if anyone had any experience or thoughts on this. It's something that I've noticed over the last few years, I think, is that goths seem to be really concerned with creating detailed, defensible positions for their opinions. And this is ironic because I spend a not insignificant amount of time on this show talking about what is and isn't goth. But it kind of occurred to me this last month that I think a lot of us are spending a lot of time debating who's right and who's wrong, or creating these kind of defensible, like thesis level arguments for every opinion we have, instead of getting out in the world and just being weird. So I wanted to kind of ask what your thoughts on the, I guess both on if you see that happening and what you think the impact of being different in the world is, and if goths kind of spend too much time trying to make an argument for something instead of just getting out and doing stuff.
Are you calling out the premise of your own show?
Yeah, I know. It's not, the irony is not lost on me.
In my opinion, I feel like, in a sense, there is room for the thesis level statements. And there is also room to tell people, maybe you need to go outside.
Touch grass.
Touch grass.
My brother in Christ.
Genuinely. I think that some people really do get so up in arms about the wrong kinds of things in the subculture. I think the things that you should be getting up in arms about are, say, for example, the values of the subculture, enforcing the values of the subculture, ensuring that there is an appropriate level of diversity, inclusion, of people, just ideas, thoughts, but absolutely no conservatives. No, thank you. And quite frankly, I think the arguments of what's goth and what's not, those types of thesis level statements, they've already been had. They've already been rehashed, and it gets very much boring. Seeing same arguments play out in different comment sections all the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you talk to the types of people who will say that, oh, there's absolutely no room for any other thing other than goth rock and death rock.
Yeah.
Those are the only genres that matter. If you go to a goth, like an actual goth club, you will be like, your head will be spinning. You like the amount of clubs that you can go to that will just and solely spin goth rock and death rock. Those are going to be the types of clubs that maybe have like 20 attendees at max, respectfully. I mean, and it's also depending on the area that you live. But I know, me personally, if I just did a goth a death rock event only, the amount of attendees I would get in DC is slim to none.
Yeah, those events only exist in like really populous cities with 15 different club nights. You can only specialize that much if you have a glut of populace.
Yeah, but the bottom line is, I think you can have the thesis level arguments, but you can also, go outside and interact with other people in the scene, especially your local scene. And if you are lucky enough to live in a place that has 15 different goth nights, go find your niche and go interact with those people and leave everybody else alone.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Anastasia. I think that it also is the nature of subcultures to create boundaries. Like, it's only natural. What is and isn't goth. It wasn't really like that to begin with, though, I think, because it was mainly just a safe space for people that were different. And these clear lines are kind of a modern thing, I think. And it doesn't sound like the nonconformity that the scene was based off of, especially following the punk scene in the 80s. I feel like it's non-conforming conformity at this point.
I mean, that's a critique.
It's more of a caricature.
Yeah, I mean, that's a critique aimed at the punk scene oftentimes as well. The insistence of doing it a certain way because that's the only punk way to do it.
Absolutely. And I'm guilty of that too, because I look like a fucking 80s. I look like an 80s goth, or I look like an 80s punk rocker. Like, I don't, yeah. But I feel like it is the nature of modern times to kind of like categorize things. Like, everything has to be labeled, everything has to be in a box. And it just doesn't feel like the spirit of the DIY scene that so many of the older elder goths have grown up with. I feel like it kind of separates them from the younger, because all you see on TikTok, like Anastasia said, is like, actually, that's not accurate, blah, blah, blah. It's like, just be weird and have fun and feel comfortable around weird people. Like, I feel like I belong for the first time in my life with you guys, and like, putting everybody in a box like that just limits how much of you can be. Like, I see that over and over again, especially on the Instagram scene. It's just copy and paste because God forbid you do anything different.
Yeah, but you can't have proper SEO or effective hashtags without labels.
Exactly. And I'm guilty of that too, honestly. I love the trad look and the death rock look from the 80s, but that's not who I am entirely as a person. And I feel like expression is so much more fluid, and it should be celebrated rather than put down or categorized as something you're not, Yeah. I'm very opinionated about this.
No, that's good.
That's great.
Well, I do want to ask a follow-up question, but Alice, if you have, I'd like to hear any thoughts you have about that.
They pretty much summed everything up. I'm pretty much on the same boat.
That's the curse of going last in any time on this podcast is everyone takes all the good shit. No, I guess what I was thinking as a follow-up to that, part of what I'm seeing is not just a detailed argument, but people spending a lot of time trying to preempt any criticism of their position. So if you're watching like a review or somebody doing a podcast or something, there's a lot of contextualization, and then there's a lot of like trying to undermine a counter argument before anybody makes the counter argument. And I think what I'm seeing more is, and this also could just be my bubble, but a lot of younger people, newer-ish goths, who are very concerned with trying to have the most correct opinion, and kind of like knowing the most true things. And so the what I was thinking while you were talking, Tay, was just sort of wondering, where does that come from? Does anyone think they can pinpoint why that's happening?
I don't think you're alone in that. Matter of fact, I will say I was the person when I first joined the subculture who definitely had to be the most correct about everything. And I do still like hold some of those same beliefs. I'm just not going to be obnoxious about it. And I'm not going to, go back and forth with somebody who, to be honest with you, like couldn't care less.
Yeah.
And the people who told me that goth was, not Slipknot or Korn, those were the people of the Discord attached to the r/goth subreddit.
Okay,
now,
yeah.
before you jump at me and call me a Redditor,
Reddit mod alert.
I'm more of a casual Reddit user. I mainly just interact with the people of that Discord because I wanted an online community to talk to, and and it is a very common thing in that Discord to point out like, oh, this is the correct way. And it's not coming from the stance of I want to be right. It's more just making sure that the knowledge just isn't forgotten, because I think a lot of the older generations of goth, especially, they want to make sure that people remember the origins of where this whole subculture came from. Because if we just separate the origins from from the modern scene entirely, then you're just kind of left with this weird countercultural bubble where people dress alternative and maybe they like dark wave, maybe they more like techno, maybe I don't know. It depends on the person, but I really do see and understand the value of understanding what came before I was around in the scene, and I see a little bit of an appreciation for it. But I'm not going to be that person who just has to be correct. I feel like it's the elder goths that kind of instill their beliefs into the younger goths, and then a lot of us Gen Zers feel like we have to be correct a lot of the time. And I would say that's a byproduct of just like, I mean, have you seen how Gen Z people argue in comment sections?
I was going to say, if you've been raised by a comment section, then that is the norm. That's what the expectations are, is this constant battling over the rectitude of some random argument about whatever random topic that comment section is pertaining to.
Right. I do agree with that 100%. I think some of it does have to do with the fact that like a lot of us were raised on the internet at this point. So like internet discourse is like half their reason for being alive. So debates are like their favorite thing in the world. But also I agree that history is really important. And I think it comes back to like a lot of us are also neurodivergent. So like, I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I'm extremely knowledge obsessed. I like to learn everything I can about something I'm interested in.
You're among friends.
Yes.
So I absolutely love learning about the history of the subculture, how it came from bands like UKDK and Charge and Rudimentary Penny. I think their name is Penny.
Yeah, I always said Penny, but I think it's Peni. But
I thought so too.
Not that I'm biased.
Anyways, So a lot of people, I think, are very passionate and don't know how to conduct their arguments in a way that is constructive. Um, I think
Right.
it comes down to a lot of us are neurodivergent, so our social skills are not really already the best. And then we spend most of our times on a screen instead of face to face with people like us. So it can get, pretty toxic really fast on the internet.
Debate perverts. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I agree with Anastasia. I'm a historian. I love the fact that you can still walk around and see some of the oldest buildings in the US. And like I think history and preserving history is extremely important. So without people like us that are like talking about how the band started and we have our old little vinyl collections and we're so geeky about it, it's so much of the beauty of the subculture, but it can quickly turn toxic. Absolutely.
If I could, I did want to add a couple of points. I think I think we've touched on the general, well actuallyism isn't necessarily exclusive to the goth subculture.
Absolutely.
It's also, think about the neurodivergent aspect and special interest sort of thing. A lot of people, maybe goth genuinely is their special interest, and so when people are just spouting stuff that's just blatantly incorrect, there's just an immediate need to just go in there and just be like, well, actually.
Yeah, I can't go to bed now. There's someone saying something wrong on the internet.
Yeah, that was a big problem for me for a long time.
One thing, again, sort of touching on the neurodivergent aspect of things, but you mentioned the whole, with the defending of a position, you're arguing against counter arguments even before they've been made. I think that's another aspect of the neurodivergence, because I guess I can't speak to everybody, but I have conversations and debates with myself constantly. So I make those exact same arguments to myself. So that's where those develop, is I am having that argument in my own mind, being like, well, but what about this? Well, no, that's not true because of this, and this. Oh, yeah. Well, what about that? This. So, I mean, having those constant conversations in your own mind, you just develop those.
We like to be prepared for everything. We constantly don't want to be, because every time there's a curveball, we feel awful. So our brains are wired in a way to where we can like calculate the curveball before it even happens. So that's absolutely a great point.
Yeah. There were a couple other places I thought of that might motivate that type of reasoning beyond the neurodivergence thing. I do think in general, goth itself is concerned with sort of examining itself and other social systems and social expectations, usually in order to dismantle them. It's sort of the classic like us versus them mentality in goth, that insider-outsider dynamic. So that's kind of that line drawing thing you were talking about, the maintaining a distinction between goth and everything else. I think I do see, as far as the counter arguments are concerned, that I think some people do, especially, well, not especially younger people, but especially online people, I think, have a worry about losing social status or having the wrong opinion.
Yeah, social capital online really does revolve around being right in these debates a lot of times.
Yeah. And so you start overanalyzing even more and kind of worrying about like, well, if I say this, who online is going to pick that apart, and am I going to embarrass myself or something like that? And it's I mean, also I do think at least a lot of my friends are just also generally interested in trying to make change in the world and feel like in order to create a better world, you have to have the best outlook on what that looks like, what you're supposed to do. But then I think we get hyper concerned with who has the best evidence, who has the best argument, who has the receipts, who is deconstructing somebody else's argument. And I do like sort of the premise of that was I think it is taking away too much energy from just acting in the world and kind of embodying goth and goth's ideals, because, and I think that happens a lot in leftist spaces, that people feel so passionately about something that they kind of lose the plot and get entrenched in this idea that only their view of how to do things is the right approach. And because I think a lot of people feel disempowered to make actual change against like capitalism or, you know, these predatory systems, that it's easier to start fighting in your own community, because you can get that sense of working towards like moving the needle in the right direction. It's easier to get like a sense of control than it is against a kind of abstracted system. But obviously, I think that just kind of self-sabotages. So I think what's becoming more important to me is emphasizing just being strange and unusual in the world, and that itself is a powerful catalyst for change. Because I think that, you know, I don't like those like thought experiments of, you know, would you flip the switch on the train tracks to hit one person instead of three? Because it's not, like that's not happening in real life. It's sanitized of context and environments, and I think we get kind of paralyzed to actually do something because we might do the wrong thing. But I think that I heard somebody talking about this. They were saying that the kind of people who say that everything they do is ethically right are usually insufferable or tyrants, and they're the terrible people who think that every decision they make in their life is the right decision. And I think the goal shouldn't be to have the moral high ground, and it should be more to just take action. There was somebody I was listening to talk about Dr. Candace Hargens, I think is her name. She's a professor, but she was saying that, do you want to have progress or do you want to be technically correct? And that's kind of what you say, correct. Trey. Yeah. Well, Trey, what that made me think of is when you're like good being the enemy, or perfect being the enemy of the good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we have to just allow ourselves to act out of a place of like trying to bring well-being to those around us, or being, you know, whatever your ideals are, if it's kindness or oddity or community or whatever. I think it is more important to try than to try and make sure you're doing something meticulously and perfectly and free of logical fallacies and whatever, because that's kind of unrealistic. So I don't think it's just a chronically online thing, but I like that's become important for me to remember. So that's the end of my soapbox there. Sorry, I talked longer than I thought I was going to.
If I could add something, while you were talking, I came across a few good thoughts in my brain. You were talking about how it feels online, and I feel like with all the arguments going around all the time, it can feel more like a war zone, like something negative, a battleground, instead of a community where we're kind of positively learning new things. It feels more like people are more aggressive about it, trying to prove someone wrong rather than trying to educate. And I think a lot of the aggression also comes from, you know, how like a lot of people will say that like you don't have a goth card, or like you're not goth enough. And I feel like a lot of people take that so seriously that they feel the need to prove it by arguing the right argument all the time about what is and isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. And I mean, I pin a lot of it oftentimes down to standard threat response as well. I mean, we talk about how this is a safe space, a community for freaks and weirdos to let the freak flag fly. But doing so in the world, acting in the world, is potentially dangerous. And when you throw open to the gates to the safe space, you never know what's going to come in. And I think it's probably become a little bit more acute in online spaces because the barrier to entry into a Discord channel, a Reddit forum, an Instagram group, whatever, is so low that it's easy for anyone to get in. And then you've, of course, got the history of trolls and the history of bad actors who are infiltrating for whatever nefarious reasons. So I think there's a hypercritical threat response happening, especially in online spaces that wasn't as prominent in live physical spaces, just because the barrier to entry of physically getting out, finding the club or finding the gathering space, going to it, paying for it, spending the time and energy to do all that was at least a degree of uh, a barrier that would keep too many people
Yeah.
out there. And then there's just a history of all subcultures in general, but I can think of plenty of times with goth being tarred with the bad actions of someone who is, or a group that has been incorrectly associated with goth. Of course, Columbine is
Yeah.
a very obvious, glaring example of that, where everyone viewed goths as this existential threat to society because they're a bunch of school shooters, because random people were termed as being goth for wearing certain clothing and liking a band that isn't really a goth anyways. So there's a lot of this threat response that I think happens, and a lot of that is where some of this defensiveness and caution around letting people who don't fit in closely come into those safe spaces.
Can sort of talk about the neurodivergence aspect of that, because I do think that was a very good point to make, and I wanted to talk about it anyway. So if we, I guess, I did want to talk about the relation between neurodivergence and goth, but maybe we could, if you feel comfortable sharing, start just sort of with the ways that neurodivergence or disability has impacted your life in general. Because I know I spent a lot of time thinking about the ways that my various disabilities or ways of thinking have impacted me, to kind of add some context.
With my neurodivergence, so let me preface this with saying that I have never been officially diagnosed with anything.
Thank you for that caveat.
But I definitely know for a fact that I do not fall into the category of being a neurotypical purely just based off of behaviors and also just observances I've made of my parents, especially special interests. And actually, my mother was technically diagnosed with not borderline, bipolar disorder, and her father was allegedly diagnosed as schizophrenic, but being that schizophrenia is hereditary and my mother definitely does not have schizophrenia, more than likely that he was also just bipolar. I would say that my behaviors, I've had a lot of self-isolation and rumination, constantly in a state of ruminating, sometimes I'm in these periods of just complete like I retreat into myself and I don't exist in the outside world, but I do at the same time, and other people have to acknowledge me, and I don't like that.
Tell me about it.
Fear of being seen, and also sometimes I do think that my neurodivergence has kind of led me down the path of just wanting to other myself so that other people see the fact that I am different from them. And if they don't share my interests, or if I don't if I just appear visibly disgusting to them, that they'll just leave me alone. Unfortunately, that has backfired, because even though I am, I guess, even though I am considered an other, the way that I style myself and the way that I present myself often and this could have something to do with also just being conventionally attractive. No, not gassing myself up here or anything, but
gas away.
You should
people,
gas yourself up.
maybe I should, but
Absolutely.
people don't leave me alone.
Mm.
And I think they eventually will catch on when I reply with very like dry or short answers. And it's not even necessarily that I'm not interested in having a conversation with them. It's more of just like, I don't really see what we would have in common unless you expressed like, the fact that you were actually, I'm not into having surface level conversations with people, unless I can tell that they have just something weird about them.
Yeah.
Oh boy, this is a juicy one. So I also am not formally diagnosed with autism or ADHD. However, I am thoroughly peer reviewed by all my friends. All my friends are neurodivergent. I don't get along with neurotypical people at all. I drive people away with my hyperfixations, my like eccentricity, and just my general interests and everything. However, I don't really usually share this, but I am diagnosed with a personality disorder. It's called dissociative personality disorder.
Mm.
And it affects my ability to understand relationships and kind of have typical relationships with others. My friendships kind of suffer from that. And my bonds to people necessarily don't really feel like they would for you. Or, well, I cannot speak for you, but
I know what you mean. Yeah. Other people. Yeah.
typically. And I've always been like this my whole life. My sibling taught me how to mask, taught me how to wait for the pause, and without them, I don't think I would have been able to conduct myself how I do these days. But I'm kind of going backward because did any of you go through like any worse mental health because of the COVID isolation?
Absolutely.
I had zero
I will
problems with
say,
it.
No
I also
way.
got broken up with like
Okay.
right before.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
aggravated factor.
yeah. And that just made me spiral so much to the point that I actually sought out therapy on my own for the first time.
Woo!
Good job. Cheer for that one. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of liked it.
Oh my goodness.
But
I
to
neither
a point,
liked
though.
it nor really disliked it. I just didn't feel it changed my life in any really significant way. I mean, there were no events. That's about all that changed. Otherwise, yeah, hanging out at home all the time on my own, pretty much my norm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So for me, it drastically tanked my mental health to the point where I couldn't do anything without having a panic attack.
Ugh.
And everything in my entire life felt like it was turned up times 5. I couldn't process anything without having sensory overload. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced it, but it's like you're a skipping record. Your brain cannot take in enough
Oh,
all
that's
the
a good way to
information
put
that's
that.
receiving.
Yeah.
It feels like your body is stuttering, and it got worse and worse and worse. I was in therapy for years to be able to even go outside without having a panic attack. Um, and ever since then, it's kind of been like a battle of understanding that I have different needs than a neurotypical, but also trying to have a handle on it so I can function as a person. So it kind of drives me even further away from neurotypicals because they really will never truly understand what I've went through and
Yeah.
my needs. I was curious if anybody else went through something similar, but I feel like it was kind of more of a reflection for me then of really understanding myself at that point. I'm also just very open to the people around me in general. I suck up everything that other people are dealing with. I have no way of buffering my senses or my emotions. So I'm extremely empathetic person because of it to a fault, I believe.
Yeah, no, very relatable. I see a lot of that in myself and my wife as well. For me, I guess my biggest constant companion is ADHD. I do think I have some autism, but that's a thing where I was diagnosed with ADHD from an early age, and that's something I've talked to doctors about throughout my life. Whereas autism is something newer that is just one of those things of, if I can identify what my weirdnesses are, that's good enough for me. I don't necessarily need to spend time and money trying to get an official. That's not really going to really help me at all, an official diagnosis or undiagnosis. So I won't really talk about that too much. But with ADHD, I very easily drop into hyperfocus, which is good for getting things done, and it feels invigorating, but I usually end up blocking out everything happening around me. And that kind of can be a friction for relationships and commitments, and or even like forgetting to eat or take a break and like burn myself out. And it's hard for me to switch tasks as well, because it like breaks my brain if I have a stream of thought with like a dozen different ideas floating around, and then I try and somebody tries to get me to do something else. It like rips me out of that, and I just lose all. It's kind of like I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3, and they have I guess it's D&D 5th edition. There's a thing called like, it's a specific type of spell where you have to maintain concentration or it breaks. That's kind of basically what it feels like. And I can get just kind of like disoriented and grumpy. So I end up in this state of not ever fully committing to something, because I don't want my son to come and say, hey, there's this thing, and then I get grumpy at him for no fault of his own. But I end up in this weird, uncomfortable brain fog place where it's difficult to think through things because I can't fully commit to them. And I guess the other major part of that would be that I have I can't really delineate between tasks or time or space or things. So it's like everything everywhere all at once. I'm always kind of functioning in some state of being overwhelmed, because I have a hard time staying in the moment, and it feels like everything is happening at the same time. So I'm trying to do everything I have to do for the next month in like the next hour. And I can't, I can't like break things down into manageable tasks and compartmentalize. So it's just all one big pile of stuff that's happening right now. I guess on the positive side, I forget who mentioned Goth being a special interest. I do think that is a benefit. I know when I started the podcast, that's kind of how I got it off the ground. Was I just let my hyperfocus go wild for years, and just read books and read about how do you do this podcasting thing, how do you do that editing thing. But it feels like a disadvantage, but I try and remind myself that it's not really a problem with me all the time that's causing an issue. A lot of it is because the system we live in requires such a degree of conformity and energy in a very specific regimented way that everybody has to align with. That's where the friction comes from. It's not necessarily because I think differently or I do things differently. It's because in the system, that's incorrect. That's not what's expected. And so that causes tension between all of those different components that are part of the system. So I try and keep that in mind and not get too down on myself for having, failing at trying to organize my life through whatever different notebooks or whatever, like sort of general ADHD organizational skills that people try and teach. And just remember, it's really not me. It's the expectations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lots of awesome points.
So for me, I'm going to give the same caveat that many of you have as well. I am not officially diagnosed with anything at all. I have never been, I've never done anything more strenuous than a generic personality test as far as any sort of analysis. So anything that I would say I associate with when it comes to neurodivergence is pure, Dr. Google as far as self-diagnoses and things like that. So for me, I mean, I definitely see myself along to a degree the autism spectrum, bits and pieces of ADHD, but that one's a weird one because I always sort of view the ADHD symptoms that I tend to hit most are along more the procrastination side, which isn't really, it's more of, from what I've read about ADHD, more of like a side effect of other aspects of ADHD that tends to come off that way, where I don't necessarily see those root causes in me as much. I mean, I can do things like hyperfocus, but I can also kind of break out of them too more easily. So I don't know. I think the main thing for me is, I mean, I felt I've put a lot of effort over the last many, many years of my life trying to just analyze human interaction and just rationalize the whole thing and figure out how that works and turn into a pattern seeking predictive machine around how to interact with people and how to move about in the world in all kinds of different environments. And that's been a huge amount of effort that I've put into it. And it makes me, if I do have any actual neurodivergence, I've become an incredibly good masker because of how much effort I've put into figuring it out. But I think for me, just experienced interacting with other people who oftentimes are at least consider themselves to be or are generally considered to be neurotypical, the fact that I had to put a lot of effort in my mind into figuring out how to exist in society, interact with it, where some people are like, what? But that's just what you do. It's just
it just
existing. It just kind of is normal. I'm like, it wasn't for me, but I've put the work in and I've got a pretty good grasp on things. And then some other, also some of my delving into philosophies and spiritualities to some degree have helped too. A lot of, well, I don't actually subscribe to any overt religions or philosophies of being. I do find the ideas behind things like Taoism and Buddhism are very helpful, especially around things like anxiety and trying to figure out how to get over being worried about how people view me and how I'm being perceived in the world. The idea of letting go and just going with things and not trying to control the environment have really been keys for me. I do like to have control, but I basically decided I can control me, and that's all I can control, and that's all I try to control at this point. So I weather very well the situation around me changing within certain parameters. Obviously, there's things that become catastrophic, but for the most part, your day-to-day, hey, schedules change, plans change, can't do this, let's do this other thing at the spur of the moment. I can roll with that again because I've put a lot of work into trying to figure out how to do that and let go of that need to be in total control of the flow of my life.
Yeah, control is my problem. No, but that's a really good point that I think segues nicely into the follow-up to that. People feeling like, oh, it just feels natural to do things this way. What I run into is throughout my life, people giving me endless shit for not getting it and feeling kind of defective or defeated or just kind of feeling like I will just never get this right. There's something wrong with me. And I think that's one of the primary aspects of goth that I've found to be beneficial is more often than not, I don't run into that with my goth friendships because I think most of us understand what that feeling is like and then extend an empathy and understanding to each other that you aren't going to find like with your work friends or the people you went to school with or that kind of thing. So let me ask then, what ways do you see neurodivergence showing up in, I guess, goth culture itself, or just accommodations that happen naturally in the goth scene?
I think we touched on how neurodivergence shows up in the goth scene in the earlier points, talking about the well actuallyism and the and people just taking a profound like special interest in how goth like works. But to be honest with you, sometimes I feel like the goth subculture just like inherently you do have to be some level of neurotypical to want to be part of this subculture and to keep it going. And or neurodivergent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
Neuroatypical.
Wrapping my brain.
Wrong, atypical.
Yes, we'll go neuroatypical.
Bucky Wucky.
And also you can even like see it in the music in itself, like how I don't want to attack any particular like musicians or anybody's preferences here with the music, but so much of it is so like samey. It's very
oh man, that's interesting you brought that up. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's like and you notice how people especially will get up in arms about the goth community if like new music comes out and it doesn't fit the same like cookie cutter format as like every other band that's gotten popular. And there's always immediately some pushback, especially to newer artists trying to emerge in the scene. People taking issue because it's not identical to things that they've already heard a million times, or if they can't identify some type of like earlier 80s influence, then it's just not goth for some reason. And I feel like the neurodivergence definitely shows up in the people that are devout fans of gothic music. And the scene accommodates to those people and continues accommodating to those people because artists see the pattern and they will pump out music that is kind of samey for the sake of appealing to people who are die-hard fans of the Sisters of Mercy or the Cure or Susie and the Banshees, and they need it's why the Cure clones exist. It's why Sisters of Mercy clones exist. I swear, it's not just because, like I want to emulate their sound, because why don't you just don't really see that in other subcultures, I guess, nearly as much as you see it in goth, in my opinion.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we'll come back to what we were just talking about in a second, but I just want to take a little tangent here because it's a similar point that a friend of mine brought up, Azzy. They were kind of pontificating on this idea that it feels like goth has become more conservative. And one of the reasons they said for that, politically conservative, was very similar, was that they feel like there's a resistance to new influences in goth music, and that goth music often revolves around standards that were set by cishet white men. I hope I'm not stealing their YouTube video idea. This was just kind of a conversation we had, but like the idea was that we're gatekeeping broader stylistic influences in a way that allows bigots to prop themselves up in the scene, which is why it's easier to call out goth adjacent bands but not so much proper goth bands or DJs, because queer people and femme people and people of color feel a little more fear standing against that because they feel like the scene won't support them, because it's also kind of going against like some expectation of what goth is supposed to be.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I did want to touch on the fact that just people being resistant to I'm in a death rock band. Like, I would call us a death rock band, but a lot of people will more than likely be quick to point out that we are kind of metal leaning, just because there is, like, I guess, a heavier presence of distortion in our music doesn't make us any less goth per se, because the influence is still there. People are so adamant that you can't mix metal and goth without it just being gothic metal, and I'm sitting here like, there are bands that have done it and pulled it off. Like, where's the resistance coming from? I don't know. It is frustrating, and I feel like this is probably something that, like, my band especially is going to have to deal with, even though we are, and we are majority of people of color in this band too. Whenever we start getting a little bit more, I guess, per se, mainstream, more accessible, and people are streaming us more often, I know that there's just going to be such a large subset of goths that just go, oh, this isn't a goth band. They're actually technically XYZ, and
And that's
completely neglect every process.
Trey, that's why being technically correct is the worst kind of correct.
No.
You were just supposed to be in your box, and that's it.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's, you guys share your thoughts. I don't need to talk. It feels like it's the long tail of, like, the legacy of not Nightwish, fucking Evanescence, like, I don't know.
Symphonic metal, I guess.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Like, if you do anything advantageous or different, you're labeled something else. It always has to have a label. You can't just make the music you want to make and have people in a subculture enjoy it. It has to either be in it or not in it.
Yeah.
And for me, being neurodivergent and in goth, one thing that I absolutely fell in love with was how everybody was so interested in nighttime.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because I grew up taking walks almost every single night, just like skating around or listening to music in the dark, and just that was like the place where I always felt like I was comfortable, because there was no people, the light of the moon was gorgeous, and stars, and it's just so easy on the eyes, and especially the fashion too. Like, who doesn't like just looking at like a pile of black? It's not offensive. It's just kind of comforting, and I find that there's so much beauty in it, like the beauty in darkness. It's so, like, comforting and welcoming, at least to me.
Yeah. 100%.
And also the eccentricity of the subculture as well fits really, really well with neurodivergent people, because they feel like they can express themselves without being like, oh, look at that, like, FAG,
Yeah.
Like, I see the most beautiful people in the subculture. Like, when I used to go to Castle Ybor, when I was living in Tampa, like, oh my goodness, like, it was the first time I ever saw people so beautiful. And they looked so comfortable, and no one was staring at them.
Yeah.
So it just always felt I've always felt like it fits me like a glove. Like, it's exactly the kind of person I am, and it's celebrated rather than looked down on.
Yeah, that's a lot of, expresses a lot of what really made me feel comfortable when I started getting into the scene too, is just this idea that it's just overwhelming acceptance. And it wasn't always because, it's not praise, it's less that, if you can let your freak flag fly, and sometimes you get compliments, but the worst you get is just everybody goes about their business and doesn't really pay you any heed. They're not going to be insulting you in general. They're not going to be staring at you, all that stuff.
It does happen. I've noticed it
does.
has been, personally, anecdotally, it has been happening to me more often the last few months for some weird reason. But yeah, in general, I agree
really?
with you.
At
Yeah.
actual events or just in general life?
Oh, you're talking about events.
I'm talking
I
at
thought you were
events.
meant in general life. Okay,
No,
no,
I'm
never
talking
mind,
about
sorry.
what makes me comfortable in the
I missed
goth
that.
scene, at
Gotcha,
goth
okay.
events, at goth gatherings, is that unlike the rest of the world, where being non-conforming to whatever the norms of where you're at leads to stares,
Right.
comments, glares, judgments. It's a very uncomfortable situation to be in because you feel the weight of judgment just suffocating you. You go
Absolutely.
into the goth and alternative spaces, and usually the worst case scenario is you're ignored. And best case is that people come up and compliment you or want to take a picture or stuff like that
Mhm.
in a very friendly and admiring way. And I always found that very comforting. It really allowed me to get out of my shell because I spent most of my youth before even knowing about the subculture doing my damnedest to just be invisible, to just
Yeah.
let
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
everything about
absolutely.
me hide. I'm just normal quotidian Trey. Nobody cares because he doesn't do anything interesting. And that was my life. And it was comfortable. It led to not a lot of that youth trauma that I have a lot of peers that struggled with, the bullying and all that. I evaded a lot of that by simply mastering invisibility.
Mhm.
Mm.
But that was hiding any sort of individuality about myself, finding the most banal clothes to wear, looking
Mhm.
like nothing. And it was a safe feeling to some degree, but it was also very boring and very restrictive.
Uncomfortable.
hmm
Yeah.
But going to these spaces as I discovered them and being able to play with stuff and yes, when you first start going out, there's a dress code. You want to be, I tried to keep that same attitude going out to clubs, like, well, let me just find something nondescript, generic, and black. That's how I hide in this new space.
Mm.
And that worked and allowed me to be in that space and be comfortable. But I didn't really feel that pressure that I had to because I saw plenty of people who weren't conforming to that
Yeah.
and having a great time. And I just started feeling more liberty to, well, what happens if I add this? What happens if I play with this? What happens if I completely buck the norm and go like in all white? Um,
Yeah,
and
your
people loved
outfit
it.
on Saturday at Nocturna was delightful, I must say.
Yeah, I got a lot of good compliments. I had not actually worn that combination before. I mean, all the elements of
Yeah,
those
I noticed.
clothing, I've had all of those out parts of my outfit for years. In fact, the majority of it was part of the all white outfit I did
Mm-hmm.
ages ago. That shirt I've had for since like the mid 90s. So yeah, that was
Isn't
what I
that
wore
this?
for the all white outfit. But I'm like, well, what happens if I add black elements to all of my limbs and
Mm-hmm.
play with that? And at a dark club, would this make me look like a floating torso? That's kind of fun.
No, I love that. Both of those things you said about what I love are things I love about goth fashion is that you are endlessly recombining things you have already
Yeah.
in new and creative ways, which
Definitely.
is so much fun. And also, the same thing happened to me. I posted a photo with wearing a shirt that I hadn't worn in a long time, and somebody asked where I got it, and I just kind of realized, like, oh yeah, I actually bought this probably about 18 years ago, and I don't remember whoever made it probably doesn't even make clothes anymore, but it's a probably pretty unheard of in other fashion subcultures to have something 18, 20 years old and still be using it. I love that.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I wanted to touch on what you said about invisibility because growing up as a queer emo kid, I never really had a space where I felt like I belonged with anybody but my sibling in their room or the few emo
Mm,
friends that I had growing up. Those are the only places I felt like I belonged until I walked into Castle Ybor for the first time.
mm,
And it completely changed my life. At that point, I'd been dressing goth all the time. And I felt like I was home. And as well as moving here to New Jersey, stepping into Meat Locker, one of the most incredible DIY venues in Jersey, probably the most incredible. I instantly felt like I had a space where I could feel free and not feel like I wanted to hide because of all the stairs and stuff. So that was a really, really great point. We feel the need to hide who we are because of the world, yet when we're around people like us, it's like we're home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're night flowers. We bloom at night.
Absolutely.
One of the cute little eccentricities of speaking of going out to clubs and things, I was thinking about this the other day, that one of my, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but one of my, I guess it was kind of an anxiety tick, but just sort of a neurodivergence accommodation I saw in the goth scene was using cigarettes as a veil to socialize.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, they were a great medium through that I could reduce my anxiety when having a conversation, because there's a start and an end that is relatively short, and when you get to the end, you can decide if you want to continue or not. And you have this sort of it's kind of like how when I have friends over, I usually do some kind of game night or movie night, because then it's not this super focus on the conversation, but there's other things taking the edge off, other things attracting your attention. And a cigarette's kind of like this little shield I can hide behind to take that edge off. And it's a great way to just sort of have an excuse to socialize, because I could either, like, asking somebody for a lighter, or God forbid, if I brought cloves to the club, every person outside would end up at some point coming up and asking me for a clove. So that was a great excuse to have these little conversations that are also removed from the extremely loud music that can be overwhelming sometimes. And it's like a little stimming thing for me too. And it's amazing how many little neurodivergent boxes that ticks. And then, when your cigarette runs out, you can run back inside to get out of a situation, or if you're inside, you can have an excuse to leave, instead of the classic. I talked with you about this, Trey, the other day, the classic run into a friend, have a 10-minute conversation, realize you don't have anything else to talk about, kind of look around, and then a few minutes later just wander off in different directions.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I never smoked, but I always did hang out with the smokers.
Mm-hmm.
I found I would go and I liked to go in that outside space, because that was one of the advantages of the smokers. And I think one of the social advantages, and I was around to see that develop, because when I first started going out, there was smoking in bars. That was fine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there wasn't necessarily this sort of more restrictive, forced cohabitation in a tight space that all the smokers had to live with when they had to go outside the club to a beer garden or just outside the door so they could make sure they could get back in again, which I think that's actually helped, especially the socially anxious, to use that more effectively as a way to socialize. Because when everybody could smoke inside the club, no problem, it's no longer that same shield, because you're just doing it anywhere.
The only thing that I lost from that was when I used to really enjoy going to like IHOP at 3 a.m. after a concert or something, and getting to eat and smoke at the same time.
Fair.
But obviously the pros of that versus the cons of giving everyone else secondhand cancer is not good. But yeah, I did enjoy that. And they had these like mega suction fans above the smoking section that would just be constantly running to suck the air straight up.
Yeah.
I quit smoking as well too.
I'm gonna start if we keep talking about it some more, I think.
Oh yeah, fair. But I feel like it did also help me as well growing up, trying to socialize. Like, please, sir, can I have some more?
Yeah.
And then just lingering instead of walking away.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let me ask another question here related to this. When I was sort of thinking about that idea of like my ADHD isn't inherently problematic, it's just that it doesn't necessarily interface with a cultural expectations that have certain expectations.
Mm-hmm.
There was there are a couple articles, but the main one I saw was a study from 2021, which is another in a series of studies over the last 10 years that have linked in some way, form, or fashion depression and goth. And so I wanted to ask you two about how you see that relationship, or if there even is one.
I definitely believe that there is a distinct connection, because I mean, I always joked that when I got into the goth subculture for the first time, that goth is just a bunch of depressed punks.
Yes.
Because I mean, think about the origins of post-punk and the style of post-punk that eventually gave us goth. The biggest post-punk influence of them all, Joy Division, of course, like literally all of their lyrics are talking about very, depressive things.
Isolation.
This entire subculture is rooted in people, especially, it's interesting, men, feeling their feelings, and expressing, their all of their negative and sad feelings, which was especially, I guess, out of the ordinary for a lot of people. And
still is, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And while there are, like, goth bands that'll write happy songs, it still, for some reason, feels out of place almost. And so, I mean, I feel like, of course, there's going to be a link between, people who are depressed and people who are into goth music, because, I mean, the genre in and of itself is kind of depressing. The music, like, even like is meant to elicit kind of just feelings of sadness and depression for people. And I guess that's also what kind of turns away neurotypical people, because, like, the only time that they want to hear things that are sad and depressing is like when they themselves are already going through situations that are,
the breakup song. Yeah.
Sad and depressed. And because, I mean, being sad and depressed is a very uncomfortable feeling, but us, like, neurodivergent people have to deal with that constantly because neurotypical people don't understand it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just Tay, you can share your thoughts. That just reminded me of the that school in Texas that tried to ban all black outfits, because there was a quote in there that I wrote down where they said all black has become more associated, is more associated with depression and mental health issues and or criminality than with happy and healthy kids ready to learn.
Or the clergy.
Wow.
Or the clergy.
Oh my God. So me personally, I suffer from depression. I have my entire life. I have suffered with self-harm. It'll be on me forever. I have been hospitalized for attempts on my life before. Because I started with the emo subculture, and you know how that is. It's like, it tells you, like, hey, it's okay to feel your feelings, and we understand. And I think that's why the shift for me from emo to goth was so natural, is because it's the same mindset. It's just finding understanding in pain and community in pain, and not pretending. Like, you don't have to wake up with a smile on your face if you don't want to, and everyone will understand that. It's the same with the punk scene as well. If you want to be pissed off and you're pissed off at the world or what's going on, then you're allowed to.
Yeah.
I feel like it goes back to neurodivergency and schools, actually. Most of us, almost all of us, are geniuses, and the world takes it out of you, the schooling system. It tells you how you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to feel, how you're supposed to act. And, for a lot of us, we've had to unlearn that brainwashing and try to understand our feelings and feel okay with not being okay. And yeah, the scene especially makes me feel like that's all right, and it's acceptable.
It's interesting you say that on the school side of things, because my son is 11 and his elementary school has a class that, what is it called? Social emotional learning, something like that. But which is great, but whenever they've presented it to us, a lot of that information is based on what is it called? Positive psychology, or
Ah,
I don't remember if that's the exact name, but it's basically it's just as problematic because it's all about achieving a state of happiness, and that's the goal and the place you're supposed to stay, which is the same thing. It's a flattening of the human experience
Did they
anyway.
not watch Inside Out?
Yeah, I know, right?
No, it's not
Yeah,
about a
and
state of happiness. It's about a state of
No.
balance and
yeah,
absolutely.
figuring out how to just feel it all without letting anything take total control.
Toxic positivity is very much real, and you can't pretend you're okay all the time and then have good relationships with yourself or other people. The more we gloss over who we are and what we're feeling, the more we lose ourselves, the more alienated we feel.
yeah. And I think to both of your points, the thing that Trey usually comments on this subject is that the correlation is those of us who do struggle with depression or have to live with depression are more attracted to that community, Goth as a community, rather than people come into Goth and then develop depression because of some inherent quality of, which is actually that raises a. Sorry, Trey, go ahead. I don't want to.
No, I just said yes. I was agreeing with you.
I agree 100% too.
Well, it raises a question because that study, which was as far as I know, the most recent one about this subject. One of the things they brought up was and you're both musicians, so I thought this would be an interesting question, that the music of Goth, the lyrical content of Goth, presents certain ideologies that result in poorer mental health. Now, in the paper, the only example they gave was, a line from a Marilyn Manson song, which I think the quote was, "Life is miserable and the world is dark and hostile," and that was no other context about the song, and obviously it's from Manson. But so I mean, you guys can talk about that if you want, but the broader question of, do you think there's a relevance between Goth lyrical content causing depressive feelings to another part?
I mean, just to hammer that
Absolutely.
point home with the Marilyn Manson thing, though, they talked about their methodology of how they were categorizing people as heavily into Goth and heavily into not Goth, and their primary question was, do you like the music of Marilyn Manson? So there was a massive flaw.
And Nine Inch Nails, I think.
And it might have been in Nine Inch Nails, but there was a massive flaw in the fundamental definitions they were using. Not to get all gatekeepery again, but when you have a baseline and you're trying to categorize people to make a point in the study, you have to really understand what you're asking.
Audience.
And that is so outside of a definition that you can, equate with Gothdom, that it was painful seeing that. I loved the method, sort of the idea behind the methodology and the long-term study and tracking people from inception in the early teens through like adulthood in the late 20s, early 30s. That's great. But when your fundamental categorization is so inherently flawed, it was painful. But go ahead, Tay.
I think it goes to so if a kid plays GTA 5, they're gonna shoot people on the street and like crash cars and stuff and like all these other things. It's like, are you kidding me? All it does is educate people that they're not alone in what they're going through. Oh, and also like the people that are like, don't let kids know that gay people exist, otherwise they're going to turn into a gay person.
And trans and all of those things. Yeah. This
So
idea that
like,
hiding knowledge would prevent people from doing things.
Yeah, it's
the exact opposite.
Far right.
It radicalizes people because they feel so alienated. They're like, they get they don't know how to process it. They'll get angry because no one understands. And this needs to be, taught to people that like, there are different ways of thinking and being, and like, you can't just beat it out of people like a Catholic school. Like, people are different and they have different needs, and they need to be educated on the fact that, like, you can't put everybody into a category where we're not the same.
I did want to add something, and I mean, I'm not sure it's entirely relevant, but I mean, it is kind of relevant to the subject of depression, in the sense that that there's this popular tweet that goes around every now and then where it says, that it's a problem when goth is making a resurgence because we're entering a recession. It's funny. It genuinely is funny when you think about it, because like, think about all the people who just become extremely depressed, like losing their jobs, and or just experiencing extreme financial hardship. And it's so interesting to me to see the rise of alternative subculture again in the 2020s, when life is also like simultaneously just the worst it's ever been for so many people. I don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
I think that
No.
Genuinely just it sucks talking about just depression and recession eras and goth and everything, but it is.
Well, I think that relates to what Trey was saying, in the sense of the methodology, because one of the things I was thinking about also was this, they're trying to link depression and goth, and they have these sort of qualifying questions. There's a couple things they adjusted for because they talk about gender as well, which I wanted to mention. But what was glaring to me was the fact that there was no linking or thought of economic status. And in my mind, poverty is a much larger influence on poor mental health than association with a subculture would be.
Absolutely. I'm living proof of that right now. Like, it's rough out here, but it's not goth that made me feel like that. Goth makes me feel understood.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's not a coincidence that both goth and punk have such deep rooting in just DIY subculture. Because I mean, otherwise they don't have the money to go and get extravagant pieces done. And I feel like that's also where like all the pushback against fast fashion comes from. Like just so many people in a low economic status just kind of and fast fashion brands, especially in goth, aren't cheap. They are not. I mean, unless you're shopping at Shein, but even then, Shein's not cheap
and
either.
You shouldn't be.
Yeah, definitely. Go to your local thrift store and dye things, and like learn how to use a sewing needle.
I thought you were gonna say go to your local thrift store and die. That's the best way to make a statement.
That's a full that's a full sentence right there. But yeah, no, I think like the economic status, we're all artists. We're supposed to be expressing ourselves creatively.
Absolutely.
And we're all poor, starving artists.
Absolutely.
Just, we don't have the money to be spending excessively on clothing, and that's why people will get so up in arms about the fashion aspect of things, because I mean, there's a half of the subculture that's maybe just completely dedicated to thrifting and DIY culture, and then there's the other half of the subculture which the DIYers and thrifters will never claim. It's just people who and goth influencers who just get mass shipments of clothes from these fashion brands, pushing all of this stuff on us, saying, please spend your money on this. Please.
Why aren't you in uniform?
Why aren't you in uniform? You need to be wearing all the new Killstar or you're not goth.
I also wanted to add, like, I learned how to paint because I couldn't afford all the patches on Etsy for my jackets and stuff. My crust pants have, I think, like over 10, no, over 20 patches. Like that would be like what, $5 a piece? My death rock
Sometimes
jacket
more, yeah.
has like 10 or more. And it's like one of them is a Sisters of Mercy shirt I don't wear anymore. And I
Mm.
painted the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I especially goes back to like, let's go all the way back to punk, for example. Punk fashion started because plaid was cheap as hell, leather was cheap as hell.
Mm.
They would cut up their own t-shirts and stuff, or they were just tattered on their own because they couldn't afford them. And then people like Vivienne Westwood was like, oh, that's aesthetic. And then the Clash happened and the Sex Pistols happened.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. Like, it's all just forced. Like, I have so much Killstar, not gonna lie, because I love it. It's nice, but I don't have the money for that stuff now. So I make my things more interesting with creativity, and it's a lot of fun to learn a new skill and to have something that's totally unique that nobody else will ever have, you know? And it's cheap. I did it for basically nothing. I had acrylic paint and thrifted jeans that I cut up and dental floss.
Mhm.
$5
You love to see it.
at Joann's Fabric. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like, and people buy these things made, like crust pants and stuff, and goth jackets and studded jackets that are like hundreds and hundreds of dollars more than it would cost to make it. And they're like everybody else's, DIY or die.
Yeah. 100%.
There's the die for you.
Well, I mean, I want to ask about the gender thing that was in there. I don't know if either of you had thoughts on the music part of that, because there was, I think I pulled a quote. So I'll just read this and we'll all find out together if this is important or not. This is a quote from the paper where they said, an adolescent who has not had the chance to flourish on an individual identity level and relies heavily on the social identity of their musical home group is likely to be more dependent on the group to define themselves. An identity crisis is thus foreseeable, especially when hyperconformity is set in motion. A musical culture whose identity revolves around psychosocial problems would represent a risk for their psychological adjustment of the fans who identify with it. I guess we did kind of talk about that, just the fact that the music is more an expression and bonding than it is hey, you should just be depressed all the time.
Absolutely. And people need to discover themselves. So like the whole identity, everybody has a goddamn identity crisis. You cannot sit here and tell me that everyone knows exactly who they are, especially us neurodivergent people that dress differently and stuff. You didn't start that way. Nobody did.
Yeah.
So it's like, if people are never going to grow and understand themselves, like, then what, do you want to live in Nuketown from fucking Indiana Jones? God. It makes me angry.
Yeah, and just adolescence in general is a time for trying on these, subcultures in a very restrictive conformist way. You want to try it to the hilt, right? You want to sample it all.
Absolutely.
And so you're going to be conforming with the norms of whatever subculture you're going with. And you're usually going to bounce between a couple of them if it doesn't stick. And that's the whole experiment of adolescence, and finding that identity is trying it. And, you don't try it halfway. You don't go half-assed and or just take little bits and pieces.
I always take the full ass.
Yes, you do.
You could end up like me too, because some days I'll be straight up punk rock out of a fucking 80s Clash concert, or I'll be as Chad Goth as a Sisters of Mercy concert, and some days I'll be emo as hell still. And it's like, I found myself, especially when I was a baby bat, like one of those people that's like, all I did was listen to basically only goth music, and I always dressed the same, and I always wanted to look like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm 25 this year, and I look like a different person almost every day.
Congratulations on your fully developed brain now.
Exactly.
Did you feel it overnight when it popped into existence?
Yeah, at 25.
Oh my fucking God. We'll see what happens in October.
But yeah, the fact that you can do that, the fact that you can jump between those identities on whims, shows to a degree that you have developed a fully functional identity, and you're able to sort of play around with it and play around with some of those former things you may have worn as your sole identity for a while. Now you're like, well, this is an aspect of me, and this other thing's an aspect of me. And today I feel like letting this aspect shine, and tomorrow I might feel like another aspect shine. But it's all part of your identity, and you're just sort of shouting out the aspects
Yeah.
that have been combined to make Tay Tay.
Because I grew into me. I
Mhm.
grew into the culmination of all my loves about the world and others. And, yeah.
So let me ask then. Well, Anastasia, let me ask you this, or should I, Anastasia of the Dark, to use your full Christian name. The gender thing that comes up in here. So essentially they make this argument that the male goths grow to be less well-adjusted because they say basically in adolescence, male goths focus more on macabre themes like death and individual exploration, and female goths prioritize emotional expression. So then when they age into their 30s, the male goths have a harder time with the incongruence of their social identity because there's more pressure to, as they put it, be your own man, which means like, get married, have kids, have a stable job, as if women don't have anyway. And so, but then they say because women develop more of a communal relationship with their emotions, they don't have as difficult of a time aging as a goth than men do, which is a very weird argument I've never heard anyone make, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Where are they getting this data from?
That is a weird argument. And to be honest with you, in my oh my God, I actually I think in general, male goths, especially as they get older, have actually been the most emotionally immature people that I've ever dealt with. A lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them. And so I feel like you get two subtypes of male goths when they get older. There's the edgelords. The edgelords never ever grow out of the I need to be individualistic and different sort of they'll often develop a holier than thou sort of mindset. Definitely a lot more than the female goths in this area. And I'm speaking personal, just from personal experience.
Right. Yeah.
I commonly interact with goths that are older in this scene. There is just a strong presence of older goths, and unfortunately, quite unfortunately, there might be a little bit of a little bit of basis, like an actual observable thing that you can see in male goths in relation to this. And this is not to grossly misstereotype men as being emotionally immature and unavailable, but I don't know.
The word is stunted.
Men are always grossly stereotyped. Classically, there's the minority group that's too often stereotyped for their behaviors. So, yeah.
No, I don't think that's a result. That's a result of interacting with the goth community. I feel like that's just
people.
That's just society. That's just what happens when you cross, I guess, having such a morbid mindset with being emotionally stunted because society places these expectations on you. And so that's where you get edgelords from.
Yeah, no, I mean you're cooking. Like I think that's a thing that people don't really acknowledge is the because there's such an emphasis on, well, goths are our own thing. But then I think that lets all those patriarchal behaviors and things become part of the scene, and not be identified because we're too up our own ass about being weird.
I 100% agree with that because, like, at the end of the day, we're people. We're just people that have a common interest. So every societal issue that has to do with everybody, like, it's gonna, how do I put this? It's like we're not special. Like,
Yeah.
We're gonna have the same issues as everybody else.
Yeah. We
Being
all
goth has
labor
nothing to do
under
with it.
capitalism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're all living in this dystopian society. So, like, just because we appreciate the darkness a little bit more and we're not as bothered by it, I don't think it makes us much different than any other people when it comes to for you were saying, like, the patriarchy and like the expectations of men and stuff. That doesn't change in the subculture, I don't think. I don't know what would change in the subculture.
Well, I have a great follow-up question to that, but Trey, I feel through the force that you have a thought.
I do.
Same.
And the odd part of it is this aspect of the study is the part I had the least problem with. Okay. But I think it's from the point of how I took it, because the way you portrayed it initially, it is in the study. You weren't misrepresenting the study at all, but that's not how I sort of viewed their view of gender. How I kind of took it is, so if you take the concept of goth, the expression of goth, the emotional drama, that's part and parcel of the gothic subculture, and you compare it with traditional ideas of masculine behavior and traditional ideas of feminine behavior, and you look at the distance between where traditional ideas of goth behavior, gender notwithstanding, just in general goth behavior, compared to masculine behavior, compared to feminine behavior, it is closer to feminine. There is a point, there's a reason that goth is always considered a more feminine aspect.
Yeah. So
I think some of their thing about that sort of emotional breaking is more directed to people who got into goth, got deeply into goth, and then got out of goth, and then tried to reintegrate in regular society after being pulled so far away from whatever the norm of that society is, and then trying to reintegrate does make it more difficult.
That's a very good point.
Well, I mean, we have had a large number of, I think mostly women on this podcast talk about the point in their life, people in their 40s and up, talk about the point in their life where they did say, okay, well, look, I'm an adult now and I feel like I'm supposed to get a real job. I'm supposed to dress a certain way, et cetera, and then just be miserable.
Yeah.
And come back after a period of, and you've talked about that for yourself as well. But yeah, that's definitely an experience people have.
But yeah, go ahead, Tay.
I also wanted to add before I forgot, like, it comes back to the freedom of expression, because men, they're expected to be like, I see this all
I love the
online.
animosity you put on the word men.
Sorry.
It really gets me going. I love it. It's the way my wife says
it. You see in the comment section of, like, anybody who has finally groomed or has a gorgeous outfit, they're like, oh, you're gay, or you're this, you're that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you don't see that in goth. You're like, oh, that is a handsome man, or that is a beautiful man, and look at you. Like, I totally agree with that. You said, I found that freedom of gender expression. I've also seen this in women too. Like, women, I feel, are more comfortable being masculine, or having shorter hairstyles and wearing more masculine clothing. And it's like, no one bats an eye in the subculture because it's about freedom of expression. So I agree with that 100%. I feel like going back into the regular world would be impossible for me. It's like, you want me to look what? Like, how? Yeah. Why? So you can continue, Trey.
But yeah, so that's kind of how I viewed it. Though I do see where you're talking, because I do remember them mentioning things about the locus of focus for the various genders, how the men potentially can gravitate more towards the death and the macabre. But again, that's going based on masculine stereotypes, where men are focused on aggression and violence and that you are the warrior, the protector, the one who has to be the one out in the front and taking the slings and arrows of life and then just sucking it up and accepting it. That's the masculine role, where feminine is ostensibly the nurturer and the emotional support and all of that. And that dovetails a little bit more closely with being the sort of emotional availability, the openness to passion that is part of the subculture, and the softer side of the subculture, the less threatening side of the subculture, dovetails well with traditional feminine interests. So if you're going down that path, which is what you were kind of emphasizing, I also don't think they're totally off base, but that is still that those were more of a stretch.
I guess I guess it just rang more hollow for me, because for me, goth was as being raised as a male in a Christian society, goth was the way that I was able to realize, like, oh, I can deconstruct these gender expectations and everything else that comes with that. So by the time I was in my 30s, I had kind of fully metabolized like my philosophical views on sex and gender and societal expectations and all of that, to the point where it was like, I understand what's going on and I understand how I feel about it. So it felt weird. I mean, obviously there are people like that, but to me, it didn't make sense to be introduced to a subculture that was so focused on deconstructing expectations, and 10, 20 years later, still trying to fit into those expectations. I don't know.
Right. Well, I think that's where the struggle is, right? Like I said at the beginning, I think their premise was that, like a lot of these sort of studies, their premise is the end result, or the end goal is to be a functioning member of quotidian society, to be another cog in the machine. Time
you said titty. Sorry.
Quotidian happens to be one of my favorite words.
I love it. I love the way you say it.
Yes, I know you do. Even though it doesn't have the word ass in it anywhere.
I know.
It's so hard.
Titty,
but
titty quotes.
But
that's all I hear is like titty quotes.
Instead of air quotes, I'm using titty. I'm gonna just grab my nipples.
I'm mortified.
What was that?
As a French speaker, I'm mortified. Quotidien.
That's fair. Quotidien. I can do it in French pronunciation as well. But I'm using the English loan word, which we stole. I guess not loan word, but stolen word. But yeah. So if you are sticking within the subculture, there isn't that problem. But if you're trying to then reintegrate with the superculture, it is more of a strain, I think, to walk back from that divergence from traditional masculine versus traditional feminine standards.
So I guess what this all brings to mind to me then, that we're kind of talking around, is question of, is goth currently, or did it remain subversive in some way? Is it a culture that allows us to act and think about how to transgress and subvert superculture, if you want to put it that way? Or is it too, we're kind of hitting on all the points in which it is very, I hate the word mainstream, but following those capitalist norms, is it still subversive?
Well, I feel like inherently there is something very subversive about leaving your house and just being completely just in a world full of people who wear sweatpants and
I wear sweatpants. That's a bad example.
I mean, okay.
Athleisure wear.
Lululemon.
Athleisure. It's all about athleisure.
In a world full of people who it feels like most of the time people aren't necessarily really trying to trying to impress or really trying to stick out. There is something inherently subversive about stepping out of your house, caked in full like, goth drag makeup. I mean, it most of it is drag, to be honest.
Yeah.
And and all black. I don't think that suddenly, just because the mainstream has picked up on the existence of goth, makes it any less subversive. I don't think just because people are maybe, or at least you see more references to to gothic subculture in mainstream media, does not necessarily mean that it's not subversive. And especially you'll see that in like articles going and saying, oh, look at these people wearing their goth looks, and then almost immediately everybody who has common sense will look at that and be like, that's not, that's and so
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, even though it has gained popularity, even though it is it gained popularity in the 80s. Was it less subversive in the 80s? No, not really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, baked into that is that whole question or concern of commodification. Is there a problem? Any problem with this sort of selling goth as a product thing, or is it too removed from actual goth to really make a difference?
No, I do think it is a problem. And where it factors in as a problem directly comes from goth influencers.
Definitely.
People who get their who get popular on social media because of their looks. And
Mommy
most
Hades.
Well,
Oh wait,
most
no,
of the time-
not mommy Hades, mother of Hades. How could I dare slander mommy like that?
uh,
I'm gonna get so much hate for this. I'm sorry.
I don't even know who that is, so
I'm lost.
that's
I'm
not
old.
influencer.
I know who they're talking about. It's a popular goth influencer who does these makeup looks.
Okay.
Just
okay, sure.
does makeup looks, and they do weird stuff during the video that, like, gets attention and views. And it's that exact style of influencer that just does looks for makeup and views, and then gets sent like a DM by brands like Killstar, brands like Romwe, brands like Shein. And Killstar, insert literally every single fast fashion, gothic or goth adjacent, brand out there. There are so many of them. And, they'll get paid partnerships, free things sent to them. I will say, I was one of those people. Killstar actually reached out to my band to send us clothes, and the rest of my bandmates definitely jumped at the opportunity. Because
Well, yeah,
I mean,
when you're
real with you,
I would too,
like,
of
free
course.
clothes
I would too.
there are a bunch of dudes with no goth clothes
okay.
in playing in a goth band. So yeah, definitely need some stage wear, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, and I mean, it's just when you make your entire personality on social media just wearing all these brands and advertising these brands, you're not an influencer. You're a walking billboard. You are literally just a walking billboard for these companies, and and most of the time you're doing it for free. I did not get any sort of paid partnership with any, maybe I get like a 10% commission if I sell some eye contacts, but it's just the commodification of goth and quote unquote goth influencers are directly linked. And to be honest with you, I feel like it's about time that we popularize influencers who actually have something intellectual to say.
Absolutely.
Or something, just things that you can actually expand on instead of just focusing on people's looks and what they're wearing.
Can I drop some names of people who are perfect for that?
Yeah.
Angela Benedict, Cadaver Kelly. Oh, I wish I had more names off the top of my head, but there's like a million people I'm thinking of that actually has something genuine to say that get less views.
Like Danny Ashes.
I know someone on
Yes, yes.
Stop it. Stop. You can't jerk me off on my own podcast.
Shout out Cemetery Confessions.
Yes, you can. You're right. You can, Trey.
I do know someone on TikTok who is considered, I guess, a goth influencer who's actually worth like watching their videos and stuff, because they do paid partnerships with makeup brands? Probably. They get sent like free PR and stuff like that from makeup brands, but I don't think I've really seen them advertising fast fashion whatsoever, because they're a strong advocate for thrifting and they're constantly talking about how they thrift and DIY. And I'm talking about Mallory Hearts You.
Yes. Love Mallory.
Yeah, Mallory like actually like has intelligent things to say. And like she's not just she's not just somebody who gets on TikTok and like gets ready just for clicks and views with the hopes of getting sent free shit.
I would consider her one of the most prolific fashion historians on the goth subculture, and deserves way more recognition for the incredible work that she does. Ugh, I love it.
And not to toot my own horn or anything, but I do not consider myself to be a goth influencer, because on TikTok I have like 50,000 followers, but like you're not really influencing anything at 50,000 followers. There are people on TikTok that have 200,000, 400,000, and then I'm
gonna stop you. Stop putting yourself down. That's scope creep, because if you imagine 50,000 people in a room, that's a shit ton of people.
Okay. I do understand
more. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I do understand that I am kind of like downplaying myself a bit. 50,000 people is a lot of followers. Genuinely, like I am proud of that achievement, to have, so many people who watched my videos and thought that I was worth following. But at the end of the day, like, how much is 50,000 people, to the point, and how many of those people are actually taking influence directly from me? Like, how many people are actually going to change their lives or their way of thinking or anything just because they saw a single video of mine talking about, whatever subject? Not a lot of people in the grand scheme of things. And I feel like in order to qualify as an influencer, you do have to, like, I don't know. I'm kind of
I don't know. I think what an influencer is kind of playing by the rules we don't want to play by anyway. And whether or not you're an influencer by those standards, I think is irrelevant. I think you're really downplaying your impact. And I think that's normal because numbers go big. It's like, it's very easy to feel like it's never enough because there's always other people that have a much larger quantity of people. But I think what's important to remember is not the quantity, it's the engagement. You can have, in fact, I have had guests on this show who have a much larger subscriber count than I do, but have a much lower engagement level than I do. For example, some will come on and bring with them a lot of extra views, and some will come on and bring no extra views, and both promoted the episode. And I think you can have a smaller audience with a very high engagement level. And honestly, even if you are making a difference in one person's life, I think the extent to which that impact has a ripple effect across their personality, the way they interact with others, the way they live their life, their hobbies, their routines, is a much deeper, more meaningful impact than I think we assume. Because I think creators, at least I know for myself, tend to downplay their relevance and tend to be down on themselves. And of course, the way that the internet is set up plays into that, because there's always people with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, and it feels like what we are doing is insignificant. But again, 50,000 people, that's a stadium. That's WrestleMania. and the degree of impact you can have, especially even if you're looking on a cultural level, on a subcultural level, there's a smaller pool of people. I think that's a very large impact that you're having in the world. I understand the reflexive perspective response that you're having, because I have a very similar knee-jerk response, I guess, to put it that way. But I just want to point that out. And for anyone out there who's also doing content, to have a little perspective on that. But to sort of go back to what Tay was saying about the way that some content creators, which is another word I don't really like, do hauls or do fashion in a anti-capitalist way. You mentioned Angela Benedict. What I like about what Angela Benedict did when she did a sponsored haul thing, it wasn't through an uncritical lens, right? Because that's the issue with commodification, is taking an existing culture and turning it into something that can be purchased. She spent a lot of time in that video talking about, like, okay, well, first of all, you don't have to buy brand name clothing to be goth. Here's the look. Here's how you can DIY it. She talked about fast fashion. She talked about she talked about capitalism. Like, there's ways to do it, and I think maybe especially younger people who are trying to find an alternative way to both feel recognized and also maybe make a living, they maybe don't feel like they have a voice to be critical, and that if they are critical, then they're going to lose their audience, or they're going to lose their sponsors. And I think that's a very common fear, because we're in a system where everyone is barely struggling. And so a lot of times it feels like the only way that you can exist in the system is to agree with the system.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, I think, a little, because I saw somebody the other day saying that Goth Dad is commodifying goth, because he has his TikTok thing is for his band and his calendar, but that's a very different. He's, because the flow of capital there is like, he has an eyeshadow palette also, but that money is going to somebody that's in a band in the scene that's putting that money back into the scene.
Absolutely.
And
we stand Dusty 100%.
Educational, yeah. The thing, like, for me, commodification is when you have an external force that's working to reduce a community to a set of products. The example I always use is Star Wars, because Star Wars as a film had political statements, had subversions of systems of power in the narrative of the movie, and it was basically immediately turned into this commercial product that formed it changed the narrative of Star Wars to basically being about what you can own, showing off the things that you own, and forming communities around the aesthetic of Star Wars, rather than any substantive message about the ideological ideas of the film, whether or not they're like good or not. Like, that's to me the drive of commodification. And I think, unfortunately, we too often, like, I agree with everything you both have said. I think what I'm trying to do now is focus more on saying, like, let's look at who's influencing the influencers, I guess. How do we subvert the system, rather than spending, I think it is good to call those people out, because they're not going to do anything different if people don't say anything. But it's also very important, I think, to recognize, like, how do we look at the ways that the ultra rich have rigged everything to be about this way of existing, and how do we do things differently? So yeah, I agree with your frustration. And
capitalism.
It absolutely, like, I'm just gonna say it, like, it is directly a result of aesthetics. We want to fit in. We want what they have. Like, that's why people that don't make that kind of money, that spend all of their disposable income or max out their credit cards for Gucci or Louis Vuitton. It's the same with Killstar. It's the same with Doll's Kill and Punk
Status.
Grave.
Yeah.
It's just to feel like, it's like your armor. Like, oh, how dare you have anything to say about my gothness? I'm wearing all Killstar, and I'm guilty of that sometimes too. I am the worst, Killstar
Yeah,
bag and Killstar jacket and Killstar top, and
it's a shortcut to having a sense of control, to having a sense of identity, and to having status. But it's the shortcut that was made on purpose to benefit the
sell
people that are
products.
making the money. And if we
Absolutely.
can talk more about how you get those things without doing that, I think that will make a difference in people's lives. Trey, what do you think?
DIY.
Oh, sorry.
Absolutely DIY.
Yep. So as far as going back to the original question, is goth subversive?
There was an original question. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Is goth a subversive aspect? Is it subverting culture, the standards of mainstream or norm culture, whatever you want to call it? I'd say that's yes, full stop. I don't think there's any doubt that goth is subversive. I think the very fact that it's being commodified and how it's being commodified is almost a testament to that, because it's being commodified as a signifier for subversiveness and edginess. That is usually why it's used when celebrities wear it, when it shows up in films and TVs, is, oh, we want a quick, easy, lazy way of showing that this is an edgy, this is a subversive character. Let's put him all black. Let's make him goth. It is viewed as subversive. That being said, and I've said this on many occasions when this topic has come up, I hate this question. And the reason is...
Go find another podcast then, Trey.
So subversion to me is an action with a point. Why are you subverting something? What is your end goal? What is the point of the subversion? What do you want to get out of it? And the problem with this question about whether goth is still subversive, the wringing of hands about goth maintaining its subversive nature within culture, is basically saying, I don't like society the way it is, but I can never change it. I'm going to give up. So I'm just going to be goth and be subversive because that's always going to be different from the culture as a whole. That's giving up on any idea that by existing in the world, by being different in the world, you're basically, I can't make changes. I'm just giving up. I'm going to be subversive and be permanently subversive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If subversion is successful, the norms of culture shift towards that subversive way of being. That is an end goal, at least if you're being subversive with a reason, with a point in mind, with a desire to see change.
Not reactionary.
Right.
Yeah.
If you think your subversion is taking the world in a way that you feel is a positive direction, then you should want to become less and less subversive without having to change yourself, because that means society is changing to meet your ideal. So the end goal of a truly subversive ideology would be to no longer be subversive because you've brought society in line with you. It's kind of like the Overton window within politics. You go so extreme in one direction to make that window get closer to yours and get more your way. Now, the problem, this is often what goth is critiqued about or made fun of about, this is a joke levied at goth, is, well, you're so subversive and you're always so edgy. What are you going to do when everybody wears black? You're going to wear yellow? You're going to wear bright orange just so you can keep being so subversive? And my answer to that is, fuck no. I don't care whether I'm being different from society. I am being me. I happen to be subversive. I happen to be different from society, but that's not my intention. My intention is to be myself, to express my truth, to express what I think is best. And if the rest of the world suddenly overnight became just like me, I'm not going to change. I'm already me. That's their thing.
It'd be a better thing to happen.
Yeah. So I don't have any problem with it.
It would be the goal.
So the idea of hand-wringing around, oh, we're not subversive anymore. Oh, we're losing our edge. Unless you've done that by moving towards a non-subversive direction, if you haven't moved, then you're winning.
I did kind of want to touch on this. I have a few things.
Yeah.
As far as subversion goes, like goth came from punk. The idea of subversion came with movements like the punk scene and hippies and rock and roll, and it all comes from the need for something to give, because our system clearly isn't benefiting everybody and something needs to change. But as you were saying, like it shouldn't be us because we have the right ideals at most points, I guess. There are some bad eggs, obviously, and weird opinions, death in June, but um, and going back to what Anastasia said about individuality as well, individuality is subversion. Like it is being yourself in spite of Nuketown all around you is subversion, and it's extremely important. And I learned that from a very young age. If I wasn't myself, then who am I? And the commodification, like you said specifically like how it's popularized. Like, did any of you see the article with like Megan Fox wearing black? And someone was like, goth is so back, goth is gaining traction again, or goth is the new fashion trend. And she's just wearing all black,
Mhm.
like Pinterest soft goth, like it's the aesthetification of goth.
Yeah.
Coming back to being commodified, like, oh, so if you just wear all black, then you're goth. Like that's all it
I mean,
is.
that is the rule of thumb for most people outside of the subculture, despite the
And
fact
it's
that
just
that
like,
explains multiple subcultures that aren't goth. There are lots of all black subcultures out there.
yeah, like so when you think of goth, you immediately think of pop culture stereotype of like the kids from South Park, or like Nancy Downs from The Craft, or who's that girl from the Breakfast Club? And like they had her change, like there was something wrong with
Oh
her.
yeah, no, they made her. I don't remember her name either, but no, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, people talk about that all the time. It's like, okay, so you see it as something what that you have to change because they need to fall in line with all your pastel pink. And don't get me wrong, I like pastels, but like I'm using it as like a really duddy pastels kind of example.
Hmm.
Um, like that we're the weird ones because we have any individuality. And the world is so off the rack, I guess you would say. Walking on High Street and it's like you just become a mannequin at that point. It's like, who wants that, really? Is it just because of societal expectations? Is it because we feel like we need to? Or is it just because, people, that's what they want? I don't know how you can even describe it.
Yeah, it was Allison was the character in the Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
Thank you, Google.
Like, like there was something wrong with her because she was herself.
Right. Yeah, that was the thing that I hated. They did such a good job throughout most of that movie of showing how we could all accept each other for who we are, except for they had to do a makeover on her. Nobody else really got a makeover. But she did. The basket case.
Yeah.
That's how they termed her. That's right.
Wow. The basket case. I guess that's what we all are to them, huh?
Mhm. Yep.
God forbid you have any sort of opinion of anything that's not the same.
That's ironic when we're talking about the goth subculture and everybody's opinion just basically being the same all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another one of those jokes. I'm a unique special snowflake wearing black just like everybody else.
Me too. My pikes are so edgy and different. I hope nobody else is wearing pikes.
Oh no, and don't even get me started on like goth influencers, especially who will get like so incredibly up in arms when people like, quote unquote copy their looks.
Oh my
Oh yeah.
God.
Like
Oh,
there was a whole TikTok beef between these two popular goth influencers, which mind you, like I don't even like hear or see anything about these people anymore. But I think it was Coffin Goth, and somebody else who had a very like similar like handle as them for a while. And they were just like basically because they both had coffin in their name or something, they were like losing their minds at each other. And like, and the worst part was they had like fans and stuff that were like perpetuating the drama in the worst way possible. Just getting so incredibly toxic for no reason other than both of them wear black eyeliner, wear black, tease their hair, and both have coffin in their names. Like, it is genuinely, like, it's so sad when I see people just like complaining that, oh, so and so copied my look. You mean the same eyeliner that people have been doing since the 80s
Yeah,
that
like
you copied from somebody else?
Trad Goth is literally just a copy and paste of Susie Sue and Robert Smith, and people act like it's like they own it. It's like literally like a generic at this point. Like, I dress like a generic Trad Goth, and I know that. There's
Well,
nothing different about the way that I look, but I don't sit there and go, "Oh, you have the same hairstyle as me," and so
okay.
canceled.
I do want to push back on the Susie Sue Robert Smith thing, because I mean, if I'm gonna be totally honest with you, modern trad goths do not look like Susie Sue. Yeah, she did have a very particular like style of makeup with the kind of like the downturned eye look and the vampiric eyebrows and everything. Yeah, that's the one that's like, maybe like two or three things that have been retained from her style that have translated into modern trad goth. But I touched on this earlier. Modern trad goth is not like really
Goth from the 80s. No, yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
yeah. It is
So
not it is not traditional. It's literally drag makeup. And I feel like that's also where people will get so angry about people copying their looks because I mean, drag queens have all this like individuality around each and every one of them.
Clowns
And
as well.
it's the
I saw
it-
that. I saw that forever ago.
Yeah.
Somebody was making that same argument. Literally, like, the makeup was inspired from drag culture and club culture and all that. Like, it came from that exaggerated kind of look, and
I feel
absolutely
like
agree.
it's kind of the same sense as if like goths want to call themselves like the Trixie Mattel of goth or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can't copy my eyeliner look. I came up with this completely on my own. This is like completely unique to me
Sure.
specifically. And it's just like,
I mean, I think
It's
I'm
just
sorry to break it
unique
to
to
you.
their Instagram Explore page that they saw and they wanted to have us say. That's what's unique about it. It's only their Explore page.
yeah,
I'm sorry to break it, but no, you're not. You don't have no trad goth. Not a single one of them has a completely unique look that's just only exclusive to them.
no.
That's why it's called Trad Goth. It's a traditional style.
There's only, I would say, like, okay, and this is coming from the perspective of a person of color. The only like, truly, I guess, unique looks that you would see in trad goth are going to come from people of color in this subculture.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because our ethnic features just don't fit the same Eurocentric type of nose, type of like the way that our eyes sit on the face. It just
Absolutely.
Hair
like that.
texture, yeah, all that has
Hair
a lot
texture
to do with it.
especially.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the hair texture. I have naturally 3B, 3C-ish hair.
Mm.
And when I do the goth bat's nest, I like there's so much texture going on in my hair all at the same time. There's the hairspray texture, there's the certain patterns of my curls just aren't the same on certain sides of my hair. And that's just the way that my hair is naturally. I can't really do anything about that. But it's one of the many things that contributes to, I guess how unique my look is to me specifically.
It's almost like people of color have been influencing culture throughout entire history.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Whenever I saw the Bat's Nest, before I really got into the goth subculture, I was like, are these people trying to imitate an afro? Is that what's going on here? Because
Yeah, they're just trying to get their hair as big as possible.
Because it almost kind of seems like you're trying to like, I could almost see because think about it. Susie Sue came up in the in the 80s and everything, right after disco culture.
That was exactly what I was gonna say.
Yep, right after disco culture, big hair was definitely a thing. Of course, like, taking influence from that sort of thing. But yeah, no. My point still stands though. And I will forever be loud, obnoxious, and outspoken about this. If you the only goths really who have a claim to originality are going to be the POC ones, because not only like all the things that we just talked about, but also we're not featured in social media very prominently at all.
Which is a shame.
I see, and it pisses me off to no end. I will like certain oh my God, there's this one YouTube channel that I can think of. Transformed. Have you ever seen a black person?
Yeah.
Nope.
Have you ever seen a black person on there?
Yeah.
Like ever?
I have not. No, I have not.
God forbid you're not completely like pale as paper. You're not goth. Like that's insane.
I have like maybe the same amount of followers as some of those people that have been on Transformed. Have they ever reached out to me? No. And they're not the only example, but they're one example that came to mind. There's so many that just kind of blatantly ignore the existence of goths that aren't white.
Yep.
Tim Burton.
Oh, and that is really, really fucking funny, because I posted a TikTok not that long ago where it was just a video of me dancing to get this, a goth version of Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. Like,
oh, hell yeah.
And it was a black person who made the sound, by the way, just like completely original on their own. They actually just like produced the drums, the bass. I don't know if you ever saw it went viral last year, the Goth Pound Town version.
Oh yeah.
No.
That was the same person.
Was it? Okay, nice.
Yeah. And so I'm dancing in this video, and I have a certain look to my face where I have just very hollowed out cheekbones. I do, and my eyeshadow is generally very much like the downturned, like sad, mopey look, and everything. And the amount of people in my comment section who went, Tim Burton, Tim Burton, Tim Burton, and
that's nuts.
And I'm like,
oh my God.
Like, I genuinely want to make a video saying, you do know that, like, if Tim Burton, like, how much do you want to bet Tim Burton would never cast me in a movie of anything that he made, like, ever. And
he explicitly stated that. He stated that
directly.
Yeah.
And the very first time he ever like actually had people of color featured in his work was Netflix, because they probably forced him to.
And it wasn't only him that was making it. He was a part of the team.
Exactly.
For Wednesday.
Yeah. So I mean it's just,
which I loved, by the way.
I have a bone to pick with the goth community and the blatant choice of just always featuring whiteness.
Yeah.
And there's the goth influencers who do the white face paint. Piss me the fuck off.
Me too.
Trad goths did not use white face paint.
And they certainly did not stop it at the neck.
Yep. And,
it drives me insane.
And the whole thing about that, and the white face paint, especially to me, just kind of feels exclusionary and racist.
Absolutely.
It's like, if I put white face paint on, it looks fucking weird. I don't want to look like a clown or a mime, or some shit like that. And it feels like it perpetuates this idea that you have to be white to be goth.
It's
And
insane to me.
yeah. Goth
Nobody looks like that. Nobody
Goth
looks like that.
See, well,
Goth influencers, it's all their fault because I mean,
Absolutely.
the TikTok trad goth look that went viral with the white face paint,
Yeah,
and everything. It's all for clicks and views, and it pisses me the fuck off.
I've never ever seen somebody like that before. I want to say 2018, 2019. It's the first time I saw that. I was
that's
like,
just because you're not old enough. It was popular in the early 2000s also, but
And the 90s.
yeah. I
just-
have a genuine I think that's an interesting Anastasia, I really appreciate your
oh,
perspective.
I mean like the mask thing. You mean just like in general, just like white face paint?
Yeah, white face paint in general.
Oh, I see what you're
very
saying.
high contrast.
The mask,
Just only on from like chin up, you mean?
yeah, the mask thing just drives me insane.
I can't speak to the white face paint specifically off the top of my head, but I do know in the early 2000s, late 90s, most foundations were used from the chin up, and most people did not blend into their neck. Not goths, just the general population, and they didn't have a lot of the times, like what I was saying in high school, the foundation was not the same skin tone as the person's skin tone either. So I just kind of assumed that the mask, as you put it, way of doing it now is just sort of a throwback to the 90s because the 90s nostalgia is so big. But I did want to say, well, no, I wanted to ask, because that was really interesting, Anastasia, what you said. And what it brought to mind, a genuine question, was when last Saturday when I was out, because in general, like, that was my perspective. That was the way I feel about it. And when I went to Nocturna on Saturday, there were, I want to say 3, but at least 2 people of color that I saw that did white face foundation. And the way that I read that was sort of like as a fuck you, like if white people are just going to steal all of our things, we're going to also steal it and like kind of reclaim some of that power. That's kind of how I read it, but I could be completely wrong. Maybe I shouldn't project my own thoughts, and obviously no culture is a monolith, so everyone has their own reasoning. But what are your thoughts on that?
I feel like it comes from 2 places. I feel like it comes from either to be honest with you, goths who get into trad goth and their only exposure to it is TikTok goths, and they see TikTok goths through it.
Absolutely.
And you'll commonly see people in comment sections, going, "I'm black. Can I use white face paint too, or should I just match my skin color?" And I, like, my heart like just kind of breaks for those people, because they're just seeing these people putting on white face paint, and they're just like, "Oh, but what about me? I'm not that skin color. It's gonna look weird on me." Like,
that's
it looks weird on everybody.
Goth is for white people thing, which is
and I have to, and I always feel compelled when I see comments like those to immediately reply and say, "Please, for the love of God, do not paint your face white. You can be gothic too by just like literally just, if you want to look dead, just contour with some purple or grayish contour,
Absolutely.
contour with black, just that's what I do. I hate the white face paint look so much because like, when I was getting into the subculture, I was just like, but I'm not white. This doesn't look right.
Exclusionary, yeah.
It's very exclusionary.
Yeah.
And nobody ever looked like
agree.
that. It's just a modern thing.
And it was genuinely kind of frustrating to me. I did try the white face paint look a couple times, and unsurprisingly, like one of the pictures that I posted of me wearing the white face paint look just went like kind of semi-viral.
I can see why that's problematic. Yeah.
I'm just like, why can't I just like be my skin color and be perceived gothic? Like, why do I have to be white to pass? And so the other
which I'm sorry not to interrupt you, but you are one of the most goth appearing people like I've ever seen. So have some, you're killing it. I'll say that.
Yeah, I put a lot of effort into, doing my best to represent for the just the Black community within Goth, and I just want people to look at me and go, "Oh, wow, you don't have to, completely change everything about
Yes.
yourself, just
Yeah.
no, you can literally just enhance what you already have."
Which is in fact counterintuitive to what Goth is about. Not
Yeah.
changing yourself to fit into
And
My
so,
favorite. Oh,
sorry.
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead, Anastasia.
Um, the other side of the Black Goths who I feel wear the white face paint, it's an artistic choice. Maybe they actually like maybe they like the it stops at the chin look. Because maybe some of us see it less of as a oh, I have to be white, and more of like a oh, this is a uniformity thing, like kind of like the
Mm.
Kyoshi warriors.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting.
Because even the Kyoshi warriors, like, I guarantee you if one of them were like, black or whatever, they'd probably still be wearing white face paint with the eye makeup or something. It's a uniform in a
I
sense.
Mhm.
also wanted to make another comment as far as another possible reason that people of color might go the white face paint outside of just trying to be white is rich cultural history within Aboriginal communities, within a lot of tribal communities, within Afro-Caribbean communities of
Mm.
ritualized white face paint from a high contrast perspective, as well as, when you're talking about death cults, evoking the idea of a skull. But there is a lot of
Oh,
that
sure.
in traditional face painting within a lot of diasporic communities, and they could
Oh
be
yeah,
trying
yeah, that's
to
true.
pull back their heritage, pull in their own heritage with their style.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually do want to give a quick shout out to my good friend. He really helps me run my events. He's my club photographer. His name is Jamal. He's on Instagram as artist_MDC. And if you want a prime example of a Black goth who really incorporates their African heritage into their look, he is a wonderful example. Genuinely, like some of the most unique looks, and he has done a white face paint look, but it wasn't in a it was more in a tribal sense where he was literally like kind of just painting a skull onto his face.
Mm.
Mm.
In the way that African diasporic cultures do. And yeah, he wears like cowrie shells. He has like a lot of African weapons that he'll photograph himself using. He's really into African history.
Hmm.
And really incorporates it well into his style. So genuinely, like, great example of somebody who fuses that goth aesthetic without losing any sense of their blackness in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Love to see that. Yeah, thanks for that shout out.
One thing that I wanted to say before I lost it, you were talking about how like you would like to be yourself, but also be gothic. What I immediately think of is the incredible makeup design of the Queen of the Damned. Like she is so unavoidably gothic, but unapologetically a person of color, and it's just so incredibly well done. And that was just the first thing I thought of.
Oh yeah, Akasha is absolutely stunning. And maybe I wouldn't say I've ever done an Akasha look, but maybe I have inadvertently. I don't know.
For me, mainly, I was
Because
thinking
she
of the
does.
makeup.
Yeah, yeah, the makeup.
But I also think just the fact that that's the reference points to the fact that of what you were saying, Anastasia, that there is not nearly enough representation for people of color in general, because I think Akasha is kind of the go-to, and there isn't much else. And it's kind of becomes a trope in a way of like, she's the
almost
the
all my
emblematic black goth person. Sorry, go ahead.
Literally every comparison that people make to me in terms of my style or fashion, it's always a white person. Maybe I'll get an occasional like really obscure reference, like somebody once compared me to Tina Bell. I don't know if you know who Tina Bell is. But she was considered the grandmother of goth, or not the grandmother.
Yeah.
Sorry, grandmother of grunge.
Yes.
And
Goddess
she
of
had
grunge,
and I mean, I guess like she didn't really have like a goth style or anything, but I guess I was compared to her on a more vocal standpoint. I don't even know, but it is sad that like, everybody else gets all these fun comparisons like Elvira, Morticia, whatever. And I just get Akasha. That's the only one. That's genuinely the only one.
Someone I was just thinking of too as well. Have any of you seen The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina?
It's been a while, but yeah.
Prudence Blackwood, right? Immediately too is so gorgeous.
I did actually like that show. I'm sorry, there's my microphone, not my ass.
The last season is a mess, but
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Her character design is just so incredibly gorgeous. And it goes back to what you say, is like she's working with her features in a way that's just like so gorgeous.
Well, when I walked back in, it reminded me, Jesse Meowser on a previous episode had said that in the 90s, in her local LA community, there was a big emphasis on individualized makeup looks, and she remembers people in clubs getting into arguments about like, you stole my spiderweb design for on your makeup, and that's my design. You can't do that. That's iconic for me. And I just think that's endlessly hilarious. But I guess it plays into the ego thing that can be a problem in goth, with where you end up also with getting like hierarchies and people, especially white men, I think is the main issue with the ego thing. But it's an issue you run into, I think, in the scene, which I think I'm blissfully detached from that, but I'm kind of in my own bubble, so I don't know how extensive that might be, because I think all of my friends are wonderful people, but I know it happens. So well, I think we can probably wrap up for the night. I think what I've learned is you two should just take over this podcast, because you're much better at it than I am. And I think we can just call it a night. Cemetery Sex Confessions. So but really, I want you both to share your socials again, but you were both very insightful, and I really appreciate your candor and sharing your experiences. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. So please unless anybody had anything they wanted to bring up before we wrap, I want to give you guys a chance to say anything you maybe didn't get to.
For all of my Black Goths out there, please don't be afraid to express yourself just because of fear of social pressure, especially among your own community. There are lots of people in this community maybe feel the need to, I guess, keep a sense of just a certain type of culture. You don't have to fit into that same exact culture as everybody else just because you were born into this race. I think that there's room for us to expand and express ourselves creatively, and it doesn't have to be in one way or one manner, and lots of people have already proven that, and being alternative is not as scary as you think it is.
Hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Well, yeah, can you remind us then, Anastasia, where people can find your personal social stuff and also your band?
So I am Anastasia of the Dark on Instagram, and TikTok, and my band is called Cemetery Sex. You can just and also important note, there is no A in cemetery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That drives me fucking I never talk about it, but every time I see somebody write Cemetery Confessions with an A, I die a little bit inside. But thank you for being so petty as I am. Yeah.
You'd be surprised at how many people in the goth subculture don't know how to spell cemetery correctly. But yes, cemetery sex, cemetery.sex on Instagram. Yes, indeed. And we are available for streaming on every platform, every major platform, at least that DistroKid helps with. And yeah, we have more releases coming next year.
And I fully endorse Cemetery Sex and sorry, my son's knocking on my door. Tay, why don't you share your I do not endorse Jesus Christ. Tay, go ahead. I'm gonna mute myself for a second.
All right. I am Tay, also known as DJ Sanguine. You can find me at gothic.enjoyer on Instagram. You can also find me and Alice at Sanguine Symphony Music on Instagram. It's currently on hiatus until I get my new studio situated, so expect more Sanguine Symphony in the future. And you can also find me as the guitarist for Shirthole here in New Jersey at Shirthole Band. Our debut studio EP is coming out soon. We're recording it in just a few days. If you're into punk at all, we're Riot Girl, feminist punk. And we're also, I'm not a person of color, but the rest of my band is. And I find that really special. We sing in some Espanol, have some songs in Espanol, and it's really great to be a part of. So that's me.
Wonderful. And I'll have links to all of that in the show notes for anyone who wants to just click the little button and go follow and listen to everything on offer. It wasn't even my child, it was my cat, who apparently has learned to knock on a door like a human.
Which is also your child. What do you mean?
That's true. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Oh, sorry. Is it too late? I forgot one thing.
No, please.
My club night for those who are local in DC is called Slings and Arrows. We're on Instagram as Slings and Arrows DC, all one word.
You know, my only connection, well, maybe that's not true, but the first connection that comes to mind when I think of the goth scene in DC is actually somebody who worked on, but she was a designer for Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, and Skyrim. And I know she was in a documentary on, sorry, I'm talking about video games now. She was in a documentary on Oblivion. And I was like, that's a goth person working at one of my favorite game studios at the time, not anymore. And I found her on Twitter, and we talked a little bit about the DC goth scene, but that was maybe 7 years ago or so.
Yeah,
anyway,
my most recent connection with the DC scene was seeing the band The Neurofarm in Tampa. I don't know how well known they are, but I know they're a DC band. And I really enjoyed them when I saw them with Azzy earlier this year.
Oh yeah, I love the Neurofarm. All of the members are just honestly just so kind, just great people all around.
Yeah, I got a chance to chat with the violinist, I think Unsinger, I'm trying to remember, but yeah, she was a lot of fun to just sort of hang out with and chat with after the concert.
And Azzy being Azzy of Obscura Undead, whose idea I stole for a conversation topic earlier in this episode. All right, thank you both for coming on again. Really, it was truly there goes my microphone again. Sorry, it was truly a delight. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
It's something that
thank you so much for having me.
I didn't think I'd be a part of, and It's just really exciting to be able to speak out in the community that I love so much with all of you.
And also to Alice, be sure to send him some love from us as well for coming on. I appreciate it.
Definitely.
As promised, I wanted to take a second and share some thoughts on a book that was sent over to me by the publisher and author titled Goth Parenting: The Dark Joys of Raising Baby Bats. It is a book of advice, humor, and deliciously adorable art about the joys and challenges of raising children ages 0 through 7. Aesthetically, this book is gorgeous. There are so many little touches in the design and so many fun Easter eggs that it almost doubles as an I Spy book. I've never purchased a parenting book before, and while my son is older than 7 now, this is the kind of thing I wish I had 10 years ago. Not because it's a very detailed parenting advice book. In fact, the design gives me a similar feeling to those 2 books by Voltaire back in the day. Both in the structure, in that it's sort of a kind of a how-to or practical guide rather than a history or anecdote or academic style book. And this leaves a lot more room for humor and has kind of a short, punchy nature to the text. The art as well is, like I said, super cute, kind of reminds me of something like Ruby Gloom. Overall, it really does have sort of a throwback feel to that type of goth book and art style for those of us of a certain age. And again, it's not really a kind of like how to parent book. There is advice and tips to be had here, but they come in short little poetic bursts that focus more on providing a cute, enjoyable reading experience than sharing detailed, complex life advice. Personally, I think this is the way to go. I never quite appreciated the overly prescriptive parenting advice, and this leans more towards sharing advice based on experiences and little emotional moments than it does from a sort of moral constructivism perspective. So it feels like someone sees you and your experiences and has a good sense of humor about it. And having a kid is a lot of stress and work. So having someone that finds the humor in that is a great stress reducer, I think. There's fun little jokes about, making jewelry with baby teeth and these kinds of things that might be weird to others, but are fun for us. One of my favorite aspects of the book, other than the art, are the puns. You get a lot of references to goth bands and songs, both in the chapter names and in the advice that they give. For example, there are chapters such as From the Cradle Bars. Another one is called Welcome Foolish Mini-Mortals, and there's another one called Living Deliciously. And there's also plenty of horror references to films like Hellraiser or Beetlejuice, but they're presented in a wholesome, cutesy way, which is fun. One of the more relatable tips in the book, just to give you a little bit of a taste, was the unexpected impact that a kid has on one's immaculately curated goth den. What do you do about your candelabras, about your delicate bone displays, and how do you pull stickers off of your expensive Victorian couch? Again, this isn't a detailed, here are the steps for how to remove stickers from velvet. It's more of just here are some things to consider and some experiences you may have as you are entering into this journey. So my final take on the book is that it's short and sweet and surprisingly an emotional experience, though I shouldn't be surprised by that when kids are involved. But if you are a parent or if you have a goth parent in your life, this is something great to have on your shelf and definitely makes for a fantastic gift. I know I would have really enjoyed receiving this as a gift. So If you want to purchase the book or take a look at what it's about, I will put links in the show notes for where you can pick that up. But again, the title is Goth Parenting: The Dark Joys of Raising Baby Bats. And with that, I would like to share a short 10-minute interview that I had with my son, where I tried to kind of hear about his take on goth. Obviously, he has goth parents, but he's also said in the past that he identifies as goth. So I thought this was fun. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So the first question I have for you is, when did you realize that your parents were different from other parents? And what was that like?
It was kind of weird because a lot of people made fun of me for having weird parents. Like people that parents like you guys wearing all black and stuff. I always kind of knew you were different ever since I was born. Because, I can tell just by looking at you. It's true.
Yeah. When did you start to get interested in goth and what that was?
When I was like 9.
Why was it interesting to you?
Something different. I don't know. Something cool. Something that I thought was cool.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain to me
I don't know
what you think that goth is?
I don't know. I don't know anything
Music,
about it.
clothing, the way you act, the way you treat people, anything like that.
Well, I guess maybe your personality's different than a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And
You like different types of things and stuff. I'd say. Wait, what'd you say?
What is goth?
I don't know. I don't know much about it. But.
Well, what bands do you know? Or do you know any? What does the music sound like?
That's kind of hard to explain. It's good, but it's hard to explain. Mm-hmm. It's like there's a lot of synth. Mm-hmm. Like I say, there's a good amount of synth in there. I can't really explain it better.
What does goth clothing look like to you?
Normally it's like black most of the time, and it has like maybe like ripped jeans and like what do you call these things that you put on your pants? Patches, or like pins on like little jackets.
Do you think that having parents that are goth has taught you to treat other people in a different way than your friends?
What do you mean? Like.
So.
Like.
I guess the thing I'm getting at. Go ahead.
No, say it.
The thing I'm getting at is, you said we were different than other parents. We're kind of weird looking. Mm-hmm. Has that meant that you treat people who are different from everyone else differently than your friends do?
I treat basically everyone like the same, like nice. I try to be nice to everyone, unless they're gonna be like super mean. I just avoid them.
Do you remember the night that we went to Nocturna? What do you remember about it?
I remember everything. We sat in a long line. It was fun. I just got tired really quick.
Yeah, because what time was it?
It was like 10 p.m.
It was like midnight.
Midnight?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was like 10.
Do you remember what people were wearing or what the music was like or how you felt? I
don't remember what people were wearing. Mm-hmm. The music sounded like, I can't explain it. It sounds different than everything else.
Was it fun? Were people dancing? Were people standing around?
Some people were dancing. It was kind of fun. I got bored and tired at the very end, though.
Well, yeah, because you were really tired. It was way past your bedtime.
I was about to fall asleep.
Do your friends know what goth is?
No. I tried to explain it to them, but they just say, oh, it's emo. And when I try and say, like, oh, this is different, they just say it's the same thing as emo. or something like that.
Do they know what emo is? Or is that just the word they use for anybody who wears kind of like dark clothing and stuff like that?
That's just what they use for people who have like black hair and wear black clothing and like, you know, those like little jackets they wear with like pins on them and little spikes like that. Basically, anyone who has black hair and wears black clothing is automatically emo.
Now, are any of your friends, if they're not goth, are they emo or are they into any other subcultures, any other kind of, subculture?
Well, what subculture? What
Anything.
stuff?
It could be furries, it could be that they're queer, it could be...
Oh, a ton of them are queer. Or at least they're into it.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's a furry. That sounds very weird.
Does anybody ever make a comment about your parents?
No, sometimes. I mean, some people, about subcultures again, some people have gone into this Therian thing, like where you pretend to be an animal. Because, I don't know. A lot of people say bad things about you guys, my parents, but some people, I don't know, just the stereotypical, oh, you're emo and you're disgusting and stuff like that. And they say like, but some nice people, like some of my friends, like Jackson or Emma or Alyssa, they are really nice. And they only say good things about you guys.
Do you think having parents who are goth gave you the courage or the interest to do some of the things like paint your nails or grow your hair out or try makeup or any of that stuff?
Definitely. I was actually thinking about trying makeup soon.
Dyeing your hair, that kind of stuff.
Oh my God, I've done that so many times. I've dyed my hair so many times. I can't even count.
And does that make you happy? Do you feel like you can express yourself the way that you want to?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have some people making fun of me, but
yeah,
as long as I can, like, be myself, then I'm fine. I mean, sometimes I'm scared to just do things that I like.
Does it embarrass you that we're goth?
No. Not really.
I think so. Maybe you aren't sure how to describe goth music. I think Mom and I do a good job of playing lots of different kinds of music. What kind of music are you into? What do you like to listen to?
Well, I don't know the genres of them, but I can say a few songs that I like. Discord by the Living Tombstone, that one's pretty good. I don't know, there's a couple other songs that I like. I can't really think of right now. A lot of it's like video game music or 8-bit music, but a good chunk of it is normal music, like V Nation. That's pretty good.
Now, when you're in the car with me and I'm playing music that I like, do you like that music or do you not like that music?
I mean, most of the time it's fine, but sometimes,
yeah.
Sometimes it's just, just don't like it.
I know you, like you said, you've enjoyed songs by Sisters of Mercy and like Lebanon Hanover, that kind of thing. So there are some, yeah, I know you don't know. But you do point it out that, oh yeah, I like this song and I don't like that song. How do you feel about the way that our house is decorated? Because I assume it looks very different than all your other friends and family.
I mean, it's fine. I like the Halloween style. I mean, I try to decorate my room differently just so I can, if I get like sick of the Halloween thing, because there's Halloween stuff all over our house. I just go in my room because my room's completely different than any other room in this house.
What do you like about goth?
I mean, basically everything. I mean, probably being different. My favorite thing.
Do you feel like you have a little more courage to express the things that you like because we're different.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you can think of you want to say?
Not really. Except for this. Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Never mind. I can't do it. Hold on. Never mind. I can't burp. I was going to burp into the microphone, because why not?
Well, Link, thank you for your time and being... How does it feel to be on the Cemetery Confessions podcast?
Good, because now I'm famous.
It feels nice to feel like other people hear you.
What do you mean?
Other people know you and see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice.
And you can know and see other people and return the favor, right?
Yeah. I try to be nice to everyone.
Yeah.
Unless if they're mean to me
Right.
or my friends.
It's tough being a kid.
Yeah.
Well, Link, thank you for this short little interview. Just say thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I quite enjoyed that. I tried to play that a little too straight, I think, because in my head I was thinking set up as a interview that I would do with a guest. But I think that could have gone a different way as well. But yeah, that's it for this episode. Next month, we are going to return with Veronica Sorrow of the Shop Meow Meows, and we'll be having her on to talk about a whole variety of subjects. So I'm very excited about that interview. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you find it within your heart to send us $1 or $2 through Patreon to help perpetuate this type of content, I would deeply appreciate that, and deeply appreciate every single person who has supported us over the years on Patreon. You can take a look at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And until we meet again, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.